Chapter 61, King of the Hill 2. Boom! The audience's attention was stolen by a massive explosion. On one of the screens in front of them, they saw a spectacular sight. Within the area of the capture point, massive tentacles made of pure darkness thrashed around, kicking up clouds of dust and stone. Constant small explosions rang out as the competitors attempted to circumvent the tentacles, but their efforts didn't beget any gains. The caster of the massive tentacles obviously wouldn't have the mana capacity to uphold them for a long time, so he'd cast them in bursts whenever he needed them. When they weren't active, he'd send out spikes of darkness and explosive balls that corroded everything they touched. The darkness element was different from Zara's shadow element. Darkness element was best known for its ability to corrode, curse, and even summon undead if one had the talent. It was an element that was widely looked down upon due to its eerie nature and the vileness of some of its users. After all, necromancy was a branch of darkness, and desecrating the corpses of the fallen was something many people saw as wicked. But this wasn't everyone. Just like nature or the system, elements were never morally aligned. Their morality depended wholly on the user, leading many to choose against discriminating. On the opposite end of the spectrum was the light element, which specialized in healing, purification, speed, and burst attacks. The light element was the main reason beast meat became consumable by other species. Its purification qualities allowed the mana to be cleansed of harmful properties that cause mutation. Light element users usually became priest classes or something similar, but it wasn't their only option. Take Alina, for example. Although she did have the ability to heal, she chose a more offensive route for her abilities. She prioritized speed and endless stamina while her attack power was also great. Then came the shadow element. It was widely acknowledged as being a sort of mix between the prior two elements. The qualities of both could be seen within it, as it specialized in speed, corrosion, and its specialty, concealment. There was a theory that shadow ability users could potentially use both light and darkness elements if they became strong enough, but it was still not proven. Back to the battle, the one controlling the darkness tentacles wasn't any supreme genius, rather it was a dark horse that had finally appeared. It was unknown why he hid his darkness affinity, but perhaps it was due to the potential scorn he'd received from the audience. The boy looked like an elf, but his ears were distinctly shorter, and his facial structure was entirely different. Judging by these qualities, it was clear he was a half-elf. As he kept using his darkness, it was clear that his body wasn't strong. He never entered direct confrontation with his attackers and opted to take range and focus on crowd control. Suddenly, a man shot out from the crowd of opponents with a flash, aiming to directly take out the half-elf even if it meant he'd go down too. He had a sinister look in his eyes, evidently displaying his disdain. "You fiends who use darkness shouldn't be allowed to exist. Allow me to cleanse you," the man shouted as flames burst from his body. But the half-elf didn't panic. He'd been berated the same way many times throughout his life, so it no longer affected him. "I have never once done anything evil in my life. If you wish to brand me as such simply due to the affinity I was born with, you are the true scourge." A large clump of darkness coalesced in his hand to form a longbow before another clump became an arrow. He pulled back the bowstring as he calculated the trajectory it should take. Then, calmly staring down his opponent, he released the string. The arrow ripped through the air before piercing into the man's shoulder. The shot had rung true. "AGH!" the man screamed as his shoulder began to wither. Before he could make any more moves, he was slapped by a tentacle and flew hundreds of meters down the mountain. The crowd cheered. This was an event attended by even fourth-class beings. They did not doubt the character of the participants. Just for this one event, even the ones with prejudice would throw away their cares to enjoy the fun. The King of the Hill event continued without a hitch for the rest of its duration, before finally coming to an end. The results didn't even need to be mentioned. Damien came in first, not being pushed out of his position on the capture point even once, while Catherine followed second and Ethan was third. The rest of the rounds were mostly won by the remaining Supreme Geniuses, but the half-elf Dark Horse managed to cement himself a spot in the final 12 as well. The competitors were once again teleported out. Damien didn't waste any time returning to the private room this time, not even stopping to talk to Catherine. Entering the room, he sat down on the couch and covered his eyes with his hands. The final 12 was where he would get serious. He wouldn't allow anyone to stand in his way. Now that the time had come, he once again reminded himself of his goals. My mother is still in the hospital. It's been 3 years since I left Earth already, and I have no idea what's going on there. While thinking of his mother, he also remembered another figure that he hadn't thought about since his early days in the dungeon. It's been so hectic that I even forgot about Alina. She was always a good friend of mine, and if I'm being 100% honest with myself, there was a time where I felt much stronger feelings towards her. Suddenly, another figure flashed into his mind, but he quickly shook that off. He didn't want to think about romance. Even saying those 3 words that people usually say to each other when they care for each other enough were words that he couldn't get out of his mouth. He didn't know why that was. Even saying those words to his mother was something he only remembered doing a few times. It wasn't just the feelings of cringe and embarrassment that held him back. There was something deeper. This deeper feeling became even more pronounced after his fall. No matter how much he socialized and no matter how much he bantered, he could never get rid of this gnawing feeling. What if they end up leaving me one day? What if they end up betraying me? He had made improvements due to Zara and Catherine, but he was still extremely underdeveloped emotionally. He spent his younger days getting bullied for various reasons. Not having a dad, his body that never changed from its stick-like figure, his awkward personality, and many more. And after the World Awakening, he was forced to spend his days with the sole purpose of making money to support himself and his comatose mother. Survival. The word popped into Damien's mind again. As he reminisced on the past, he realized that his struggle for survival started even before it manifested in a literal sense. Maybe the fact that he was always struggling to survive in the unforgiving world was the reason he could so easily forge his will at the beginning of his journey. His only thought for so long had been survival, taking care of his mother and himself, and then staying alive. Where was there time for him to mature emotionally? It was more apt to say that any strong emotions he had were suppressed. It was only in battle that he could fully express himself without care. Maybe this was the reason he became a battle maniac in the first place. The freedom he felt when he put his life on the line, and the excitement that pumped through his veins when he clashed blades with others, these feelings were euphoric and addictive to him. It was fun. It brought him joy. He could barely spare a moment for rest and joy for many, many years, so finding joy in fighting was something he relished. He wished to hold on to that feeling as long as he could. Maybe once he won the tournament, once he explored the secret realm and obtained his 3rd class, once he finally found a surefire method to return to Earth, and once he finally had his mother back, he would be able to relish in feelings of happiness and maybe even think about romance. His thoughts came full circle as they got back on the right track. He had no idea why he suddenly became emotional, but he didn't mind. Being someone who didn't have the ability to feel intense emotion and sadness, he also relished this feeling. It meant that no matter what he had become, he could still confidently say that he was himself. He was a being that cared about the consequences of his actions. Uncovering his eyes, Damien noticed he wasn't alone anymore. Catherine had long since entered the practice room, but sensing the forlorn aura around Damien, she stayed silent and simply watched. Zara stood at her side and did the same. Although they both wanted to comfort him, they felt that they didn't have the right to do so. Whatever was bothering him was out of their control. What is it that's making him act like this? Catherine thought. During the many months they'd known each other and even seen each other on a daily basis, she had never witnessed Damien hold this kind of aura or expression. However, before she could delve deeper into her thoughts, Damien stood up. Taking another look at him, he seemed back to normal. It'd be impossible to tell that he was depressed or even sad in the slightest only a few seconds ago. "Are you okay?" Catherine asked worriedly. She respected his privacy, but that didn't mean she didn't want to understand him. "Yeah, I was just thinking about some things. It doesn't matter now. What's important is that we're going to decide a winner soon." Damien smiled gently before patting her head. Walking past a stunned Catherine, Damien continued to talk. "Better not stay dazed for too long. I'll be waiting for you at the top." Chapter 62, Final 12-1. The structure of the Final 12 tournament had been decided, and it seemed luck was on Damien's side. He and Catherine were on opposite sides of the bracket, making it so that if they fought, it would be in the finals. With the Nexus event winding down, the tournament would only last 4 days. There would be 2 fights a day, with the final day being used only for the finals and the award ceremony that followed it. For the Final 12 tournament, the use of artifacts would once again be allowed in the competition. Now that only the strongest remained, it would give them the most entertainment this way. There were still regulations, though. The competitors were required to use artifacts of the same grade when they compete. For instance, if one side had an SS rank artifact while the other only had an A rank, both competitors would have to use A rank artifacts. This was to further the inclusion of fairness. Since there was a dark horse this year, another rule was added. If the participant didn't have an artifact, they would be given one that either matched the grade of their opponents or both competitors would be given artifacts of the same grade. Of course, this addition only applied to offensive artifacts and weapons. Defensive artifacts were still banned, as it would be too much of a hassle for the staff to regulate their usage. Defensive artifacts came in many different forms, with some being armor and others being small rings or accessories that could generate barriers. The variety was something they didn't want to control, as too many restrictions wouldn't net them any benefit. Damien thought over these rules in his head. As he walked to the stage, he encountered Ethan, who proceeded to start a conversation. "Yo, it seems the tournament staff had kept our first fight in mind when they structured the bracket and made it so we would only face off in the semifinals." Damien nodded. The Dark Horse and Catherine were also set up in such a way. The tournament staff definitely knew that the outcomes of the 1v1v1 fights were decided. Although the other Supreme Geniuses ended up winning their King of the Hill matches, they were extremely close games, completely unlike those of the aforementioned 4, who dominated their competition. "Of course they'd do that," Damien responded. "Our fight will be too amazing. How could they start the tournament like that?" Ethan broke into a fit of loud laughter. "You're right, but I saw your King of the Hill match. I know I can't keep up with you if you use that crazy barrier, but I'll entertain to the best of my abilities." Damien also laughed. "Sure, I'll be waiting for you in the semifinals then." They strongly shook hands before going their separate ways. It was time for them to sweep their first matches. And that's exactly how it went. Damien barely even had to try in his first match to destroy his competition. It reinforced his belief that not all Supreme Geniuses were built the same. The 2 opponents had teamed up to deal with Damien before fighting amongst themselves, but this was a useless strategy. Damien didn't even activate his vector field, using only his basic distortion ability along with his lightning and plasma beams to win. Even his sword was still unused. He tried to find enjoyment in every battle after his small bit of introspection earlier, but he couldn't do it against these weaker opponents. He was never the kind of guy who killed ants for fun. Due to this, he was filled with anticipation for his semi-final fight. Ethan had already proved that he could give Damien a blood-pumping fight, so he didn't have any worries. Now, he was curious about what Ethan used as an artifact. The impression he gave off was of someone who fought with their fists, but Damien doubted this. Ethan's status within the beast domain didn't seem to be very low, so he had to have an artifact or two. 2 days passed and the other opening matches had ended. As expected, Catherine and the Dark Horse came out on top. Catherine had simply trapped the other 2 in an illusion until they eliminated each other, while the Dark Horse spent much more effort. He was forced to use many tricks and deceptions to gain a perfect opportunity to snipe his opponents with his darkness arrows. It was now the day of the semifinals, and Damien and Ethan were standing on a cracked and barren desert as they faced each other. Both of them stood unarmed at the moment, but there was no doubt that they wouldn't continue that way for long. As the match was started, both of them kicked off at max speed and met each other with fists. It seemed they wanted to start the same way they did back in the first round. Neither of them made any moves to block as fists and kicks landed on their faces, stomachs, and ribs, and both of them slowly drew blood from their opponent. It was an extremely primal fight. The ground caved slightly from impact and dust clouds sprang up from the force as the two continued this cycle. Then a change occurred. As if they had previously agreed, both of them infused their elements into their bodies. One was on fire while the other was covered in lightning as they once again charged. Their fight became much more destructive. Wild arcs of lightning bounced around the arid atmosphere as they met with tongues of flame. These meetings led to explosions that would randomly destroy the surrounding scenery. No matter how much they continued, though, neither of them got the lead on the other. Damien had recently achieved the master level of control with his lightning element and was focusing on its destructive properties, creating plasma as his main use, but he didn't use this ability. This fight was a pure frontal assault, and he felt like attacking from range would signify his loss. Ethan shared this feeling, so they continued to duke it out. Finally, they both pulled out their artifacts. Damien's pitch-black sword with its intricate purple designs crackled with lightning as the space around it slightly bent and twisted. On the other side, Ethan wielded a massive dual-sided warhammer. It was a mixture of gold and red and emanated a regal aura. The two grinned before charging again. Damien didn't waste time. Void Sword Art first step, bladeless. His blade vanished as a huge gash was created in the ground, but Ethan was prepared. Sensing an invisible force headed towards him, he let out a resounding battle cry. Achaye! He swung his war hammer down with full force as it crashed into the ground. Shockwaves spread as a wave of fire met the spatial tier created by Damien. A battle of elements then began. Both sides pushed against each other, but none could gain an advantage. Taking this chance, Damien transitioned into Dance of the Void as he charged towards Ethan. His movements became elusive and graceful as he vanished in and out of space. Ethan was put on the defensive. He was a brute through and had never tried to figure out such a patterned and structured movement like Damien's second step sword art. Their battle continued to rage on. Ethan had switched his approach as the fire surrounding his war hammer coagulated. Every strike he sent was accompanied by a massive explosion created by Ethan's use of fire's combustion properties. As time passed, his mana capacity began to dwindle. Noticing something, Damien paused his attack as the two made distance. "Friend, it seems my mana can't keep up with you. I've already lost, but let's end this with a bang. I'll be using my strongest attack, so I hope you'll join me in doing the same." Damien nodded with a light of respect in his eyes. When it came to physical strength and battle sense, he'd found an equal and a rival in Ethan. Showing him this type of respect in battle was a given. As they stared at each other, their mana raged. At its apex, they released their attacks. On Damien's side, it was his classic third step, Spatial Collapse. This was still and might forever be one of his strongest moves. On Ethan's side, a massive firestorm raged. A sea of fire filled with flaming tornadoes charged forward to meet the collapsed space Damien created. Its result wasn't an explosion, but rather a deafening silence. The flaming sea was swallowed by the collapsed space before a true battle began. The destructive properties of the fire tried their hardest to destroy the portion of space and almost succeeded. A phenomenon Damien had never witnessed before took place as small cracks formed on the outside of the portion of space he'd collapsed. It was a sign that the area would be broken soon. But it didn't happen. The flaming sea slowly died down before it could escape the collapsed space and continue its charge. Ethan began falling to the ground, but was quickly caught by Damien, who put Ethan's arm around his shoulder. I may have won this time, but it was mainly due to my greater mana capacity. I expect an even grander fight from you next time. Ethan grinned. That's right. Next time you won't even have a chance to beg for mercy, I can promise you that much. The two had established a firm relationship through battle and had officially titled each other as friends. With the results obvious, it didn't take long for them to be teleported out. They then witnessed another surprising scene. Catherine was standing there waiting for them while the dark horse was sprawled on the ground, looking like he had just seen something terrifying. Looking at Damien, Catherine flashed a demonic smile that caused both men to shiver. I'll see you in the finals then, yeah. As she walked off, Ethan turned to look at Damien. He's trying to tame that woman, a true man indeed. Chapter 63, Final 12-2. After Damien caught up to Catherine, the two began talking about their fights. While Damien's was a normal fight story, Catherine's was on another level. The fight had started normally, with the dark horse utilizing his darkness element to corrode the surrounding environment and trying to corrode her as well, while Catherine fought back with her wind. She created a field around her that the corrosion couldn't penetrate and attacked at range with her wind swords and bullets. She hadn't used her illusion affinity yet as she decided to train her wind during combat. As the battle raged on, the dark horse became more confident and went on a fierce offensive. He used his darkness arrows to penetrate her field, allowing the corrosion to affect her. However, this was when something unexpected happened. When Catherine felt the corrosion affecting her body, she suddenly received an epiphany about her use of illusions. Her thoughts were simple. Can I use illusions to mimic sensations as well? Once it entered her head, she couldn't get it out. She stopped focusing on her wind and switched her strategy. From then on, it was a one-sided battle. Catherine used her illusions to amplify her attack power as she always did, but she added something new. With every attack that even slightly nicked the dark horse, he started to feel more pain than he should have. It didn't work very well at the beginning, but she had a whole fight to improve herself. At first, it was a slight change, turning a pinprick into a paper cut, but as time went on, her mastery over the concept intensified. Catherine's illusion control was already at the master level, as she had started on a path to affect reality, so it wasn't like she was starting from scratch. Rather, what she had to do was figure out how to use the same concepts she had been constantly training on a more ethereal thing like sensations and pain. All the while, even as she bombarded the dark horse, she was also testing her abilities on herself. She made small cuts on her skin and attempted to amplify the pain. Her master had taught her something crucial regarding illusions, which was that they always tend to hold more power if the caster had more understanding towards what they want to portray. If Catherine wanted to create an average chair out of her illusions and sit on it, it'd be possible. The chair would feel real even if it wasn't, but if she wanted to create a sun, it was impossible. It'd only be a projection that didn't contain the power or properties of a star. When she thought like this, she realized something else. She had already been subconsciously affecting sensations by attempting to make her illusions feel real to the touch and the eyes. It wasn't a new concept at all, rather it was a simple change in direction. With this, she knew her path. Her advancement speed became rapid, and the small cuts she created on her skin were hurting like deep gashes. By this point, around an hour and a half had passed since the fight started. When Catherine started utilizing illusions, the dark horse lost his chance to win. His attacks would reach Catherine, only for him to find that she wasn't there in the first place. To make it worse, his whole body was aching. The small wounds he'd built up throughout the fight were causing him more pain than he thought normal. Suddenly, a wind blade sped past him as he narrowly dodged, escaping with only a flesh wound. But this was enough. The dark horse felt like his entire left side had been gouged with a massive claw. Catherine didn't stop, relentlessly attacking him as the pain in his body was amplified past his limit. But she wasn't done. For her final experiment, she decided to test the corruption she had felt earlier. Although it didn't work on the same scale as the dark horse's attack, it was truly overkill. Added onto his previous pain, the slow spread of corruption and decay he felt within his body was the final straw. Without even the ability to speak, he passed out. It was only after being teleported back to the stage that he had woken up, feeling only slight pain in his body as it should have been. This was the reason for his terrified face. The fact that it seemed like it was all a dream, but he knew for a fact that it happened was terrifying. Even Damien was slightly terrified hearing this. Even though his eyes could cancel any physical illusions used on him, he had no idea if it'd work on sensations. He casually asked Catherine to make him a chair, wanting to test his theory. Sitting on the illusionary chair, Damien felt all the small hairs on his body raise. Although his eyes did warn him that the feeling of touch he felt was an illusion, it didn't block the illusion itself. Now he knew. When he faced her, even if he knew his pain was an illusion, he'd still feel all the pain. Well, I'll deal with it as it comes. The day passed quickly as the finals approached. The talk of the whole continent revolved around the two geniuses competing for the top spot in the tournament. The common populace was incomparably excited. They had even given Damien and Catherine the nicknames of Spatial Lightning Prince and Elusive Wind Fairy, respectively. It seemed that their numbing sense was especially terrible. Most people were aware of the cringe that those nicknames held, so once they found out about Damien's adventurer days, they opted to continue calling him the Grim Reaper instead, while Catherine's was just shortened to Elusive Fairy. Now that it was time for the finals, the betting houses were packed. 100 gold on the Grim Reaper. What are you talking about, you idiot? Obviously, the winner will be our Elusive Fairy. Suddenly, a new voice rang out. 1 white gold coin on the Grim Reaper. All eyes turned to this voice to find a bulky wolf demihuman. He ignored all these gazes as he placed his bet and left the area. Ethan smiled lightly. Let's see what kind of battle you show me today. At this time, Damien and Catherine were already on the field. It was a lush forest this time, as opposed to the flatlands of the semi-finals. The two possessed excited grins on their faces as they watched each other intently. It had been an entire year since they met, and both of them were itching to battle ever since that first meeting. It was now that they'd finally get the chance. And then the battle began. Neither of them wasted any time. A sword appeared in Damien's hand while a scythe was in Catherine's. They took distance and began their fight. However, it looked more like a choreographed dance, a deadly one. Catherine danced gracefully as the environment around her became illusions. Countless wind blades surged forward, attempting to cut Damien into pieces. Meanwhile, Damien's dance was more efficient and cruel. His figure flickered in and out of reality, as every swing of his was accompanied by large gashes in the ground. This was the result of Damien's hard work on his sword art. He'd finally obtained the ability to fuse and flow between his different sword arts. Wind blades were met with spatial blades as the area between the two turned into a minefield filled with explosions. Through that field, many small wind bullets whizzed by and rushed towards Damien. For the sake of the battle, Damien didn't have his vector field around him, but he found that his decision was the wrong one. The second those wind bullets hit his body, Damien felt like he was a mortal getting repeatedly smashed with a hammer. Knowing Damien's toughness, Catherine didn't hold back on the pain amplification. Damien grit his teeth and powered through it. He'd already had his arm ripped off, his body structure forcefully changed at the cellular level, and his entire left side burnt to a crisp. If he couldn't handle this much, he should just give up his pursuit of power. Damien still didn't activate his vector field as he felt that an absolute defense within his power range was a cheat skill, so he endured the multiple doses of pain amplification that continuously berated him. All the while, Damien kept attacking. Shortly after, he added plasma beams that were a combination of his vector control and his lightning to the mix. After his training with Malcolm, these plasma beams were much more powerful than they were when he first learned how to use them. They ripped through trees like butter and flew straight for Catherine. Sensing danger from those beams, Catherine raised multiple illusory earth walls as she used propulsion to blast herself out of their trajectory. This was a good decision, as the beams pierced through those walls and continued into the expansive forest. Catherine gritted her teeth. My attack power isn't on par with his. I need to find another way to win. She then thought back to the move she used in the first round to defeat Evan. That's it. She immediately implemented this strategy. Every wind attack she threw at Damien now contained the properties of sound, affecting his balance and making him nauseous. He still gritted his teeth and endured, but judging by the blood that seeped out of his mouth and ears, it was clear that her strategy was effective. Although they had been tempered, Damien's internal organs weren't nearly as sturdy as his flesh, his muscles, and his bones. This was the first time someone had used that weakness against him. The battle continued, with both of them approaching their limits. Catherine's mana was close to running dry, and her stamina wasn't great either. Meanwhile, Damien still had around a third of his mana, but his consciousness was fading in and out as he struggled to keep himself awake. Just as he had thought before, Catherine was the only one in his generation that could challenge him. Suddenly, Damien sensed immense danger. Looking over at Catherine through his blurry vision, he saw her taking a deep breath. He knew what this signified, as he had done it countless times before. She was charging up for a breath attack. Indeed, Catherine had gotten the idea from a fictional monster she had read about called a banshee. Their screams were said to even cause the souls of their victims to be damaged. She focused on amplifying the sound within her voice, keeping any offensive properties of wind away from her internal body. In front of her mouth, a small tornado began to form. Then, when she felt it was enough, she let out a high-pitched screech. Accompanying this was a massive horizontal tornado of wind that she strengthened with illusions. Not wanting to lose out, Damien let out a resounding roar. His dragon's breath was released, directly clashing with Catherine's banshee scream. A massive explosion ensued. The trees in the surroundings were ripped to shreds by rampaging wind before they were burnt to cinders by wild lightning. The ground couldn't bear the pressure and directly caved in more than 10 meters deep. Both Damien and Catherine were flung away. Damien was barely conscious, but he held onto his reasoning while he endured the ringing in his ears. His training and the blood whirled back in the dungeon was the only reason he could do so. Teleporting over, he saw Catherine sitting on the floor, similarly teetering on the border between passing out and staying awake. He slowly regained his bearings before putting his hand on her shoulder. "I win," he declared with a weak grin. Although she wanted to refute, she couldn't. She was truly burnt out at this point. Damien helped her up as both of them used each other for support. Even though he had won, he wasn't any less exhausted than her. Outside, the crowd was roaring. Nobody could contain their excitement after seeing such a spectacle as those two breath attacks clashing. Within that applause, the announcer's voice rang out for a final time. The winner of the 100th anniversary Nexus event is Damien Void. Chapter 64, Ceremony 1. The Nexus event had finally reached its end. Now, the only thing remaining was the award ceremony. A match was held earlier between Ethan and the Dark Horse to determine third place, but its outcome didn't need to be mentioned. Ethan's fire was fatal against the Dark Horse's darkness, not to mention his insane physical strength. The darkness arrows that had successfully won many rounds were unable to perform well against such a powerful body, and by the time it could attempt to corrode, it was burned away by flames. Like this, Ethan had a relatively easy win for third place. The finals had been held around noon, so the ceremony would take place in the nighttime. This was out of consideration for Damien and Catherine, who were in dire need of rest after such an intense fight. The two of them were teleported back to the main stage, where they faced a rambunctious crowd whose cheers could drown out all other sounds in the vicinity. How could the crowd not be excited? The Nexus event only occurred every 10 years, and not every generation was guaranteed to produce insane geniuses. However, this generation produced not just one such genius, but 4 of them. Even the Dark Horse was included in this list since he lost only to Catherine. And the fact that Catherine was able to drive Damien, who was largely unimpeded in his path forward, to a point where he was close to fainting with exhaustion, elevated this status even more. As the two basked in glory, Damien held Catherine's hand before raising their arms in the air, taking a victory pose. The crowd went wild. Under the deafening cheers, the two finally left the stage and headed back to their private room. They thought of nothing but sleep at the moment, not even realizing that their hands were still interlocked. Reaching the king-sized bed, they simultaneously collapsed and passed out. Damien still needed to heal his shaken internals, while Catherine needed to recover her dwindling mana capacity. As the two slept peacefully, many conversations were taking place around the arena. "Haha," laughed Ethan. "I knew he hadn't shown me everything he has. Damn, I'll force it out of him next time." The two elves in front of him nodded. Indeed, if he had used that last ability during the earlier rounds, nobody would have stood a chance, Ara complained. "That might be true, but it doesn't change the fact that he held back to match us and have proper battles. He's an admirable guy," responded Erin. The two siblings and Ethan were all extremely high-status individuals within their own domains, and with the beast and elven domains bordering each other, it was obvious that they'd have a connection. Many others within the crowd were thinking along the same lines. However, the fact that Catherine could match Damien even when he released power that could squash the competition was also a major point of discussion. Eva was also within the arena. Although she didn't say anything, there was a fierce light of determination shining in her eyes. Back in the penthouse, the various leaders were also conversing. "That little girl of yours is really impressive. To use sound magic in such a way is very rare, not to mention that it would usually cause heavy injuries to the throat and internal organs," the Beast Empress pointed out. "Indeed," the Dwarf King said, "sound is a property of wind that not many choose to pursue. It's admirable of her to attempt such a thing and even succeed." The Adelaire Emperor's face remained unchanged, but if one looked closely, there was a concealed light of pride deep within his ruby eyes. However, his focus was on something else right now. "That boy." The Beast Emperor nodded. "It's as you think. That was Dragon's breath. The boy isn't dragonkin from what I sensed, so it doesn't make sense for him to have that." The Beast Empress also chimed in. "His beast aura is a mix between many different species, but its main properties are that if a wolf's, it would make more sense for him to obtain some Fenrir bloodline than for him to have dragon's breath." The emperors continued pondering for a while before making a decision. "Let's wait until the award ceremony ends, then we can simply ask him about it. At the end of the day, he's 2 classes below us. He can't resist our will," proposed the Stanton Emperor, but this idea was immediately rejected. "No, that boy is a spatial ability user. It wouldn't be far-fetched if he had multiple ways to escape when he feels threatened," the Lenin Emperor chimed. The two had always had a rivalry, so the other leaders weren't surprised at their differing opinions. The two argued for many minutes before the Adelaire Emperor raised his hand. "Enough. We will ask the boy about his power, but we won't push for an answer. Every expert has their fair share of secrets. What's more important is, has anyone been able to find his origins?" None of the leaders spoke for a while before the Beast Empress raised her voice. "I've been able to track down the first location he appeared in, but it doesn't solve the mystery of his origins in the slightest." Seeing her peers looking at her impatiently, she chuckled before continuing. "What's interesting is that I gained this information from a second-class gray deer. Their species is known for their high intelligence, thus she was able to converse with me. It turned out that a year ago, while she was grazing in a field on the outskirts of the Helia Forest, a human male and a large black wolf emerged seemingly from nowhere. They simply appeared in the middle of the forest without prior notice. According to her report, the human was covered in dirt and blood and wearing nothing but a torn rag on his legs, while the wolf was similarly dirty. It was only after they bathed in a nearby river that she saw their appearance. After this incident, the two exited the forest and took off running. This was the last she saw of them, and she had almost forgotten about it entirely. If it was anyone besides me asking, I doubt she'd have remembered this small meeting. All of the emperors once again fell into thought. While most of them were still confused about what value this information held, there were three among them that formed a faint possibility in their heads. This was the Adelaire Emperor, the Beast Empress herself, and Malcolm, who was silent for most of the conversation. Did he emerge from a dungeon somewhere in the area? If so, could he be? It wasn't a rare case for otherworlders to get trapped in the gates that formed before dungeons were naturally created, but it was extremely rare for them to survive long enough to reach the surface. Even if they managed to reach the surface, they'd be in an unknown land and most likely be killed due to their naivety. But Damien seemed to possess knowledge of the world from the beginning, leading to their confusion. But in Malcolm's head, many pieces of the puzzle seemed to click together. He was the only one among them who'd spent a significant amount of time with Damien, so he naturally knew better. While Damien had basic knowledge of the world, much of it was outdated, as if he'd learned it all from an old book. He didn't know of the Nexus event before he entered the academy. He didn't know about the Nox or the war before Malcolm explained it, and he didn't even know about mana circuits as a concept. He's from a beginner world, Malcolm thought. But what kind of beginner world can birth such an insane talent? Many hours had passed while the leaders were having their discussions, and night had already fallen. Within the private room, Damien's consciousness stirred as he slowly began to wake up. His eyes still half closed, Damien attempted to sit up, only to notice a weight on his right arm and side. Looking to his side, Damien was so shocked he almost instinctively teleported away. Why do I always end up in cliché anime scenarios with her? This situation was as cliché as it gets. By his side was a slumbering Catherine. Her head was rested on his arm while her arms were wrapped around his waist and her legs around his own. What am I? Her personal body pillow. Damien shook his head, moving to take her off of him, but he ended up stopping halfway. Damien was still a man. The two pillowy mounds against his chest and the faint valley he could feel on his thigh forced him into a tough position. Looking at her now, Damien realized that Catherine did indeed have a spectacular body. Her figure was curvaceous, but not to the point that it was unnatural. Her chest was a solid C-cup that he felt would fit perfectly within his hands, and as for her butt, Damien only had to take a peek to know it was perfectly shapely. The slight jiggle when he moved also didn't escape his sharp eyes. Honestly speaking, it was a body figure that was perfectly within his tastes. At this point, he was back to laying down as he subtly admired the sensations he was feeling. Suddenly, a wild thought entered his head. If she can enhance pain during battle, couldn't she also enhance pleasure during? Without warning, Damien fiercely bit his tongue, drawing blood and snapping out of his thoughts. He couldn't stop himself from sweating a little. Even previously, when they ended up in a much less precarious situation, his bestial instinct attempted to drive him wild, but since there was no physical contact, it was easier to control. This time, he almost failed to control himself. He knew his thoughts and actions were out of character, but his mind subconsciously ignored that fact. This is insane. Lust is an aspect I never needed to focus on controlling until recently. At this point, I either need to stay abstinent or relearn how to control this instinct. Before Damien could think further, he felt a slight movement on his side. Catherine's eyes slowly fluttered open. She was feeling great, as she had slept using an extremely comfortable pillow, so she grabbed it tighter, wondering what it was. When her vision became clear, the first thing that greeted her was a pair of swirling amethyst-red eyes staring back at her. "Had enough?" Damien said with a teasing smile. It was only then that Catherine realized the awkward position the two of them were in. Scampering out of the large bed like a startled cat, Catherine took a second to collect her thoughts. Then, without another word, she sent a fierce glare at Damien before fleeing the room with a face redder than any tomato that ever existed. Damien's smile turned wry. Doesn't she know that looking at me like that only makes her more attractive? Shaking his head, Damien also stepped out of the bed. As he exited the room, his thoughts shifted once again. It's finally time to get my elixir. Chapter 65, Ceremony 2. When Damien re-entered the arena, the scenery was completely different. While the Colosseum-style stands were still packed with hundreds of thousands of people, the actual floor was changed. Previously, it was a large space with only the single massive lifted platform in the middle that equated the stage. Now, it was filled with decoration. The stage itself now held 47 small elevated platforms dispersed around its perimeter, while the middle of the stage had 3 special platforms of different heights, though they were all larger than the other 47. The smallest of the 3 was bronze in color, the middle was silver, and the highest one was a pristine gold. These were obviously meant for the top 3. Besides these platforms, 9 regal thrones sat side by side, each of which was decorated differently. As the participants hadn't arrived yet, it was natural that the leaders wouldn't make their appearance either, leaving the thrones empty for now. The empty land was filled with majestic carpet and decorations that highlighted the stage. The ambience truly changed when it was time for the ceremony. Slowly, people started filing into the arena. Many tournament staff also entered, guiding each genius to their respective spot in accordance with their rank. The higher the rank, the closer to the middle of the stage they were situated. Glancing around, Damien spotted Catherine looking at him in the distance. Just as he was about to wave and head over, he saw her harumph and turn her head. Damien once again smiled wryly. "You were the one clinging to me, so why am I the one receiving the harsh treatment?" Even while complaining, Damien didn't bother her. He figured she needed space after that awkward encounter, and he respected that. Once again scanning the area, he found Ethan. This time, he wasn't rejected as he walked forward. The two greeted each other with a firm handshake and side hug before engaging in conversation. "We'll be going to the secret realm after this, right? I honestly can't hold my anticipation," Ethan said with an excited grin. Thinking about the coming adventure, Damien couldn't suppress his grin either. "I also can't wait. Adventuring the secret realm, adventuring the continent, and then adventuring the myriad worlds, just the thought makes my blood boil with excitement." Ethan wasn't expecting Damien's ambition to be so grand, but thinking about the scenes Damien described, he had to agree. "Well, when you end up exploring in other worlds, make sure to call me. I can't miss out on such a fun adventure." Damien replied with a smile. "How could I leave you behind? I need a personal punching bag for whenever I get bored." "You?" Ethan exclaimed. The two stared at each other as if they were about to fight before they randomly broke into a fit of laughter. Sure, let's see who becomes whose punching bag at that point. If anything, you'll always be that Catherine girl's punching bag, so I'll be able to have fun watching that show." Damien rolled his eyes. "Yeah, even if it's like that, at least I have her. Where is your girl at? Or can an ugly bastard like you never attract a woman to you?" The truth is, Ethan was a pretty handsome guy in his own right. It was only when he stood next to Damien that he only looked slightly above average. Even now, there were plenty of girls of all races within the crowd who were sending heart eyes and screaming his name. Ethan scoffed. "HMPH, all the girls love me, it's just that I've already got a fiancé, so I turn them away." "All right, when I meet that fiancé of yours, I'll make sure to tell her about how many women you always have trying to warm your bed. A good brother should always help his friend out." Damien snickered. The two continued bickering for many minutes like a pair of children before the ceremony started. By this point, the emperors had already arrived and the ceremony had already begun, yet these two paid it no mind as they tried to one-up each other. It was lucky that they were seated relatively far away, so besides the leaders with their fourth-class senses, nobody could hear their bickering, though it was pretty obvious if one just looked at them. The Beast Empress smiled lightly, and the Beast Emperor had a wild grin, thinking back to when he was the same age. The Adelaire Emperor had a thoughtful look on his face as he watched this new side of Damien. It looked like he was performing some sort of evaluation. The ceremony for the other 48 competitors was simple. Since there was no material reward for them, their name was simply stated along with their allegiance, if they possessed one. It was essentially a reward of exposure. The ceremony continued for about an hour before it was time for the top three. It was at this time that Damien and Ethan finally stopped their bickering, though they still glared at each other with battle-hungry grins. In third place, Ethan Wolfang from the Wolfang clan in the Beast Domain. He will receive an SS rank artifact. Ethan walked up to the third-place podium as he stood proudly. As the audience cheered, the tournament staff approached him. "Would you like a defensive or supportive artifact?" Ethan didn't even hesitate to choose the supportive one. The tournament staff pulled out a silver plate with a shining golden bracelet on it before presenting it to Ethan. As he accepted it, he grinned. It seemed he was satisfied with his artifact. In second place, Catherine Hart from the Hart clan in the Adelaire Empire. She will also receive an artifact as well as a permanent stat boost potion. These potions can only be created by the most experienced and talented alchemists that exist currently. Catherine repeated the same procedure as Ethan, standing on the silver platform with pride. When the staff approached her, she chose a defensive artifact. She was then handed a glimmering platinum-colored chest armor and a bottle of liquid. Smiling, she glanced at Damien before pretending like she didn't do anything. Finally, it was Damien's turn. And finally, our winner for the 100th anniversary Nexus event, Damien Void. Although he is currently unaffiliated, he is a member of the Adventurers Guild as well as a resident of the Adelaire Empire. He will receive the previous 2 rewards as well as Elixir, the miraculous medicine that can heal all ailments and injuries. Damien stood on the highest golden platform with pride. He received a supportive artifact that was graciously shaped the same as his cross-shaped earring, and the same potion as Catherine. Along with these two came a glowing reddish-gold potion in a pristine glass container. This was the elixir that he had been chasing so desperately. He finally obtained the method to cure his mother. He immediately put his rewards away in his subspace to check later. After a few closing words from the various leaders, the ceremony finally ended, finally closing the Nexus event. Night quickly fell and various parties were taking place in the vicinity of the massive arena. Crowds of people danced and celebrated without boundaries or misgivings as they threw their cares away. Damien watched all this happen from atop the arena roof. It wasn't normally accessible, but he had no problems teleporting here. As he watched the masses below enjoy their time without responsibilities, he slowly laid down and gazed upon the stars. Responsibilities, huh? Although it feels like a massive weight has been lifted from my shoulders after obtaining the elixir, it doesn't feel like my responsibilities decreased. It's the same feeling I had back before I fell into the dungeon and before I faced that wolf and mutated. Damien reached his hand out, attempting to grab the stars. Something is happening on Earth. This intuition has never failed me, and the secret realm has been screaming opportunity, so this is the only possible scenario. But I don't have the power to rush back. I can only pray that nothing happens to my mother before I can arrive. Damien closed his eyes, attempting to clear his mind. It was then that he felt someone arrive next to him. "Aren't you supposed to be celebrating? You were first place in the Nexus event, after all. Everyone wants to party with you." Smiling lightly, Damien responded, "And aren't you supposed to be avoiding me? Who knew that our friendly neighborhood battle princess was the shy type?" Catherine blushed and looked away. "About that, I'm sorry I clung to you like that while I was asleep. It must have been uncomfortable." "Well, it's true that you were pretty heavy," Damien teased. Why you?" Catherine stuttered before pouncing on Damien, repeatedly banging on his chest. Okay, I was just kidding," Damien relented. "Besides, do you really think I was uncomfortable? I don't think I could name a single straight man who would be uncomfortable with a beauty using him as a pillow." Catherine paused for a second as her face once again became a bright shade of red. Slugging lightly, she slowly laid down. Since she had just pounced on him, she ended up laying on top of him with her head on his chest. Damien raised his brow. This was definitely crossing a line that they'd both tried especially hard not to cross for the past few months, but he said nothing. Putting his hands around her waist, he continued staring at the night sky. A peaceful atmosphere permeated the air as the two stayed still in such a position. Neither spoke and neither could find words to even start a conversation. Both of them were too focused on their current position. Suddenly, the calm sky was lit up with bright colors. Fireworks shot through the sky like shooting stars as the night was illuminated with various shapes. Damien watched this scene as he spoke. "You're missing quite the show, you know." Catherine lightly nodded but didn't turn her head to watch. Instead, she buried herself deeper into Damien's chest. Catherine then mumbled something under her breath. No matter how Damien tried to decipher what she said, he couldn't, but he knew. Above the crowds of people emanating a pure aura of happiness, and under the beautiful night sky lit with the color of the stars, Catherine had said something he would always wish he had heard, no matter how far in the future it'd be. Chapter 66, Secret Realm 1. After that eventful night, an entire month passed without much drama. The hordes of people who crowded the arena slowly dwindled as everyone went back to their mundane lives. Only the top 50 remained within the arena, as it was more convenient to have them gathered before the secret realm opening. They would also be given ample information regarding what to expect. For this purpose, they received small jade slips that were apparently information storage artifacts. Unlike spatial rings, these jade slips couldn't store physical objects, but they could store memories and information that can later be viewed by others. Before checking his jade slip and gathering information, Damien took a quick look at the items he received as the reward from the tournament. Just like artifacts, potions of high enough rank would also be quantified by the system. Earring of Concealment. An earring forged by a master craftsman that holds the ability to conceal the user's presence completely. No footstep will make a sound, and the user will not be noticed unless they will it. Added effect increases mana capacity by 250. Damien felt the description was a bit lackluster, but equipped the earring anyway. His previous one was simply for decoration, so it wouldn't hinder him either way. Only when he equipped it did he realize that the description was apt. His steps were lighter than any feather, and he felt that his whole presence had been erased. He quickly walked up behind Ethan and grabbed his shoulder, terrifying him in the process. It seemed that unless he was standing directly in front of someone, they wouldn't be able to sense his presence at all. Permanent Stat Boost Potion. A potion created by a master alchemist. It has the ability to permanently raise a single physical stat by 25 points. Due to the effects of the potion, it may only be used once every 5 years. If taken before this cooldown, the potion will have no effect. Damien thought for a second. His physical stats were already high enough, but it wouldn't hurt to have more. The only problem was that the potion would only raise a single stat. He decided to save it for later once he had time to properly think it over. Finally, he checked the elixir. Unlike the other two item names that carried the same light blue color as the rest of the holographic system window, the elixir was titled in shining purple. Elixir. A miraculous medicine that cannot be forged by anyone alive on the current planet in the present time. It has the effect of healing any ailment, disease, illness, or injury to a large extent. Even if one is on the brink of death, one can be brought to their peak by this potion. On mortals, this potion shows even more exaggerated effects. Damien smiled. I don't know what it means by exaggerated effects, but I'm sure it's a good thing. He let out a light chuckle as he imagined his mother waking up with super strength. After he was finished with that, he decided to get informed on the secret realm he would soon be entering. Damien learned a great deal about the eternal secret realm through the Jade Slip. Though it was called a secret realm, it truly was its own world. It had various ecosystems and inhabitants that lived their own lives. 50 people was a negligible amount compared to the total population of the secret realm. Most of this population was made up of beasts, however. Unlike on Aparen, a majority of these beasts would be third class. Second class and fourth class beasts were also present in smaller numbers, while first class beasts weren't even counted. They were insignificant in the scheme of things. These beasts were scattered throughout this small world and would pose a great deal of danger to the participants, but that was the point. Without danger, there was no pressure to motivate growth. However, this didn't mean they were being sent to die. The Jade Slips contained information on the known locations of fourth-class beasts to avoid. Although the secret realm wasn't opened every 10 years with the Nexus event, it was opened every 100 years as its own separate event. Another fact about the secret realm was that it didn't have the structural integrity to house demigods, making fourth class the peak of strength. The information they were provided was gathered during the 10 openings since the Great War ended. Besides beasts, these were also intelligent species. There was a rumor that someone spotted a fairy race and various subspecies of other races such as moon elves. The most dangerous of these indigenous races were the barbarian race. The barbarian race prioritized strength over everything and held others in contempt due to their use of magic instead of physical might. Barbarians were especially hostile against outsiders and possessed an uncanny ability to differentiate those who entered the secret realm from its original inhabitants. Not much else had been documented about their race, besides the fact that the participants should be wary of them. The environments of the small world were also filled with hazards. Massive poisonous swamps that could easily kill second classes, active volcanic regions whose temperatures could melt flesh like nothing, and many more places could be found. Though it was considered a small world due to its status as a secret realm and lack of access to the outside, its ecosystems were much more varied than the continent. The secret realm was home to countless treasures that matched or even outclassed the number of dangers. It was said that many of the peak experts from all races on Aperin gathered within the secret realm during the end of the Great War to leave legacies for worthy successors of the future. They were aware that their deaths were approaching, perhaps looking to pass the mantle to someone else. This speculation was created due to the discovery of structures titled legacy tombs. These structures took all different shapes and sizes but shared similar qualities. They'd test those that entered them and judge their worthiness. If one could prove themselves during this test, they'd reap massive rewards. Reading about this fact made many puzzle pieces click together for Damien. This whole time, he was wondering why everyone said there were treasures everywhere, and the picture painted in his mind was quite silly. He imagined that he could randomly start digging and find an S-rank artifact in the dirt or something. Knowing that there was more of a structure to the acquisition of treasure reassured him that his time in the secret realm wouldn't be spent doing stupid things. However, his dumb thoughts weren't completely wrong. There were indeed some treasures that were randomly strewn about within the realm, as they were remnants of battles that took place there in the past. Only, the number and quality of these were much lower. After gaining the knowledge he required, Damien continued his days of rest before his entrance to the small world. On one of these days, he was called forth by the emperors who wished to ask him about his breath ability, but he kept his mouth shut. After all, the only reason he could acquire traits from certain beasts he devoured was due to his void physique. He hadn't seen any mention of his physique in the records he had read, but he still thought it best to conceal its existence. The fact that its abilities still weren't completely unlocked told him that it was a power he should save as a trump card. That meeting wasn't worth mentioning. Since the emperors had already agreed not to pressure or antagonize him, it ended swiftly after his refusal. The only hitch was the constant stare he was getting from the Adelaire emperor. It wasn't ferocious or filled with killing intent like the stare he received when the two first met, but it was equally creepy. It felt like the emperor was staring into his soul, attempting to gauge all of his secrets. The emperors chose to remain in the arena as well since their strength was necessary to open the secret realm. They all had many forces left guarding their empires and communication devices to receive news if something went wrong, so they weren't worried about their prolonged absence. In other news, Damien and Catherine's relationship had made slight progress after the end of the Nexus event. The two still maintained a line that they didn't want to cross yet, but their closeness had been taken to a new level. They were together at almost all times, even training within each other's vicinity. Not to mention, it wasn't rare to see them cuddling as if they were truly a couple. Sometimes they'd end up falling asleep on the same bed as they did after their fight in the finals, with the only difference being a great lack of awkwardness. When they woke up, they'd simply say their good mornings and continue with their days. The one who had the most headaches with this was Zara, who's as always stuck third-wheeling. Yet, whenever she brought up the topic, both of them would swiftly avoid it. Zara had been spending time with the Beast Empress lately, as she had asked Damien for his permission. She also felt a connection to the Empress that she wanted to figure out. As everyone continued their peaceful daily lives, the month ended, and the time to open the secret realm dawned on them. It was the first day of the next month, and all 50 competitors who were granted access to the secret realm gathered. In front of them was a large field that, although empty, radiated an ancient aura. The 9 leaders were standing in front of them. Without a word, magic power billowed as they channeled mana into the ground. Vroom! A strange sound echoed through the air as the ground began to warp. Within half an hour, a massive hole had formed in the previously still grassland. "All right," said the Adelaire Emperor, who had small beads of sweat trickling down his face. The amount of mana required to open the entrance was truly extravagant. To enter the secret realm, all you have to do is jump through this hole. The portal will lead you directly there. Keep in mind that you'll be separated when you enter, and your locations will be random. Stay safe and stay cautious as you search for opportunities and gain power. 50 small tokens flew into the participants' hands. Then, with the permission of the leaders, they slowly walked forward until they reached the edge of the gaping hole. These tokens will directly teleport you out after 6 months. Remember, if you lose the token, you'll be stuck until the next time the secret realm opens, and if you die, the token will teleport your corpse out. Ignoring the competitors that were now showing slightly nervous expressions, he finished his speech. "Now go on and explore. May fate bless you all with fortuitous encounters." Damien smiled. It seemed that most of his speech was directed towards a specific someone, but he wasn't going to comment on it. Turning to that someone, his smile grew wider. "See you on the other side." Then he jumped. Chapter 67, Secret Realm 2. Following Damien's example, the rest of the geniuses followed suit, jumping into the abyss. The fall made Damien remember the beginning of his journey in the dungeon, except this time he wasn't in heart-wrenching pain as he fell. Surrounded by the gnawing darkness, Damien ended up reminiscing. After a short minute, he saw light coming from below him, outlining the exit to the tunnel. Within this light were expertly concealed spatial fluctuations. At the speed he was falling, it didn't take long for him to reach. Falling out of the tunnel, Damien was greeted with bright blue skis everywhere he looked. The wind caused his clothes to flap wildly as he continued his descent. Looking down, he could only see a layer of clouds. At this point, Damien had already learned how to fly through the use of his vector control, but he decided to fall through the cloud layer before making any decisions. He didn't know how high he was or where he was, so he wanted a better overview. And when he finally broke through the cloud layer, the scenes presented to him truly left him in awe. Below him was a vast mountain range bigger than any he had seen before, stretching to the ends of his vision with some mountains that even touched the clouds. This was an impressive feat since the ground was so far away that Damien couldn't even see it from his current elevation. Instead, what he saw was a second cloud layer that was present around halfway up the tallest mountain he saw. Besides the mountains, multiple floating rocks took the shape of an asteroid belt, with some rocks large enough to build cities on them. It reminded him of that one scene from a certain movie about tall blue people. If he had to imagine the immortal mountains he saw mentioned in cultivation novels on Earth, this would probably be the scenery in his head. As he continued to freefall, Damien released his awareness and mana sense to get a feel for the dangers on the mountains he was close to. This gave him another dose of shock. He could only cover a minuscule portion of the mountain closest to him, but even in that portion, he saw countless third-class beasts roaming freely. It would be best if I continue descending. I can return to this area once I've raised my strength. Making this decision, he accelerated his descent and quickly broke through the second cloud layer. Another majestic sight greeted his eyes. Vast plains filled with roaming beasts with various shapes, looking prehistoric, and large bodies of water strewn around the area. If he had to name the environment, he'd call it a marshland, but it was too pristine and beautiful to be named as such. At this time, he could finally see the bottom of the mountains. With his current direction, he was headed straight into a deep gorge between two mountains, so he decided to stop and figure out his location before continuing. It was an easy task. He simply used his vector control to manipulate the air molecules to keep him afloat. Any normal person would be crushed by the pressure of such an abrupt stop, but he didn't have that worry. Vector control was truly a very conventional power to have. Taking out his jade slip, Damien viewed the map that had been recorded within it. Although it wasn't detailed, as there were many areas of the secret realm that had yet to be explored, it had enough major landmarks to gain a general idea of his location. Damien didn't doubt that these immortal mountains were one of such landmarks, and it truly was easy. Looking at the mountain next to him, which seemed to be the tallest of them all, Damien pondered. This is the Godspark Mountain, which means this area is the heaven-reaching mountain range. Though most of the mountain range was unexplored, there were many stories about it, especially this Godspark Mountain. It was rumored that the peak of this mountain was the resting place of a fallen god. A fallen god, huh? Damien thought as he gazed upon the mountain that faded into the cloud layer. He felt an indescribable urge to climb to the peak and witness even a trace of a being at such a level, but he suppressed this. There was no way such an impressive peak didn't contain a fourth-class beast. Maybe once I reach third class. Shaking off his thoughts, Damien started descending. He knew there were countless different areas and ecosystems in the secret realm, but it would take many years to explore them all, not to mention just this one expansive mountain range. With the rumors about Godspark Mountain, even if there wasn't a fallen god at its peak, there were sure to be many legacy tombs lining its slope. He was also only 25 levels away from third class. With the number of second and third class beasts on this mountain and in its vicinity, he'd be able to gather the XP needed relatively quickly. I haven't evolved in a while either. Damien wasn't a masochist in any way, shape, or form, but he had subconsciously equated intense pain to the feeling of gaining power. The traits he received after all that pain made him crave to feel it once again. However, he wanted to start small. Instead of landing on the mountain itself, Damien descended into the gorge below it to start his grind. Just like his dungeon days, he was going to power level in the darkness of the gorge. Meanwhile, Catherine was going through her own thoughts and decisions. Damien wasn't the only person who was dropped at the Godspark Mountain. When Catherine exited the abyss, she also found herself in the air, but unlike Damien, she stabilized immediately. Her location was just above the first cloud layer. Once she descended past this layer, she saw the marshlands as well as the valley between the two adjacent mountains. With this, she also pulled out her jade slip to identify her location. Reaching the ground, Catherine glanced around warily. She had sensed many strong auras in the vicinity and wasn't prone to moving carelessly. According to Father, the Godspark Mountain is one of the best places to gain fortuitous encounters. He also arrived here when he entered the secret realm when he was younger, and he outlined the locations of a few legacy tombs in the area for me. As the daughter of an emperor, Catherine had some natural advantages when it came to information. Although she wanted to share this information with Damien, her father strictly disallowed it. It was clear that he wanted Catherine to gain the most benefits during this trip. Suddenly, Catherine's ruby eyes began to change. They became a bright shade of gold as her pupils became countless glittering sparks, making her eyes look anime-like. Within Catherine's vision, many strings of different colors emerged from the air, connecting to unknown places and people. Within these strings was a single one that was dyed with the color red. Tracing the location of this string, Catherine smiled. It looks like he's close by. However, she didn't immediately run to his location. Although she wanted to explore with him, they needed to gain strength first. I'll find him after I reach third class. Let's see how he bullies me then, she thought with a mischievous grin. Without wasting another second, Catherine dashed into the dense forest that made up this region of the vast mountain in search of prey. Unlike these two, who shared enough fate to be transported close to each other, the rest of the geniuses were spread out across the vast realm. If taken sheerly by its size rather than population density or advancements, the eternal secret realm could be considered slightly larger than the Aparan continent. One could genuinely spend the entire 6 months they had within the realm traveling from one end to the other, not even completing this journey before they were teleported out. In a large region filled with molten lava, an erupting volcano stood a lone wolf demihuman. He was surrounded by a forest of trees filled with crimson leaves that looked as if they were made of flames as he fought a massive lion-like beast with his bare hands. In another region of eerie forest stood a half-elf. He calmly watched the environment as the darkness around him thickened. The trees, grass, and even the creatures living in this ecosystem were corroded and skeletal, but it didn't seem to bother the half-elf. Rather, he seemed to be most comfortable in such an environment. It was theorized that the individual who created the secret realm had designed the gate in such a way that it accounted for the fate of those entering it. But this was always written off as heresy. After all, nobody wanted to believe that fate could dictate their actions. However, fate itself was an esoteric concept that none could fully fathom, leading to many believers in its machinations. Whether it was the work of fate or by sheer luck, these 4 geniuses had been transported to optimal locations for their training. It was unknown if this phenomenon was the same for the other 46 geniuses who entered along with them, but it wasn't important. Although they were all in separate locations, their present goals aligned. With their strength, they could explore many locations in the secret realm uninhibited, but this wasn't enough. Their aspirations might differ from each other, but each of these true geniuses held grand ambitions. They craved the pressure, they craved the danger, and they craved to be the first to explore some of the many danger zones present in the realm. For this goal, they spared no effort. Each and every one of them raced towards third class. At the top of the tallest peak in the entire realm, an aged figure watched all of this occur. Although it was clear that he existed, his figure was ethereal, almost as if he didn't possess a body of his own. Sighing lightly for the umpteenth time, the aged figure thought to himself, "Let's see if this batch of younglings have what it takes." Chapter 68, Secret Realm 3. Although he was surrounded by darkness, Damien's vision wasn't inhibited in the slightest. His eyes truly made things convenient for him. It had already been an entire month since he entered the secret realm, but he still hadn't left this area. Pulling his sword out of the snake-like beast in front of him, Damien looked around. There was no longer a single living being in his vicinity. Most of the beasts within the gorge had been at second class, and the only third class he found was the giant snake he had just slain. The result was obviously a slaughter. The beasts within the gorge will no longer contribute to my growth, and I haven't found any with special traits yet either, Damien thought to himself. It was at times like these that he realized how special the dungeon he fell into truly was. Every floor boss gave him a new trait, even allowing him to acquire Dragon's Breath. Meanwhile, in the year he had spent in the outside world, he hadn't found a single beast with a unique trait he could devour. It wasn't like he didn't find beasts with traits, as most beasts who had advanced their bloodlines enough had traits. He also devoured almost every beast he killed, so that wasn't the issue. Rather, it was as if the traits weren't good enough for his body to absorb them. As he was in his thoughts, he heard footsteps approaching him. Of course, he had brought Zara into the secret realm. If he was going to a place where he'd grow so much in power, it was only natural to bring her as well. Besides, 6 months was too long for either of them to stay separated without the ability to communicate. Since the two were relatively powerful, they rarely found the need to fight together anymore. instead opting to separately hunt so they could net gains. Perhaps when they started facing higher-level third classes, they'd combine their power. All right, since we've cleared this gorge, it's time for us to start making our way up the mountain, Damien said as he jumped onto Zara's back. She had grown so big over the past year that he wouldn't be able to casually hop onto her back if he didn't have his physical stats. Though she usually made herself smaller, there wasn't a need for that when they were hunting. Without further ado, the two flew out of the gorge. Head to a place with more third classes. It's the easiest way for us to level up. Damien was already at level 81 after slaughtering the beasts in the gorge, but he felt this speed wasn't enough. At this rate, he'd only achieve third class near the end of his time in the secret realm. And although he didn't know how to exactly quantify Zara's progress, from her words it seemed she was also stuck at a bottleneck. He was aiming for them to hit third class or at least the peak of second class by the end of the next 2 months. With this thought in mind, the two of them directly skipped the first cloud layer and started on the middle section of the mountain. Catherine had also made ample progress in the past month. Unlike Damien, she started directly by climbing the mountain, leading to many more encounters with third-class beasts. She had already achieved level 90 at this time. As she decapitated yet another beast, the red string she had been watching started to move. It seems he started taking things more seriously. Well, you won't beat me to third class anyway. Catherine rushed up the mountain, also opting to fly instead of travel on foot as she had been doing up until this point. She was already at the level of the first cloud layer but hadn't crossed it yet. She was competitive to the point where she waited until Damien exited the gorge to move past this layer. Unlike the surface level, the middle portion of the mountain contained a healthy mix between second and third class beasts. The number of encounters one would have was significantly increased. Besides the many legacy tombs one would find here, this was another reason why the Godspark Mountain was one of the best places in the secret realm to be transported. With the way its population density was split, it was a perfect leveling zone. Another month swiftly passed by as the three of them continued their climb. At this time, Damien was in the middle of a fierce fight. In front of him was a massive flying hawk that looked like a Zapdos Pokémon. He already pulled his sword, but he was forced to rely more on ranged attacks. The fight had already been raging for around half an hour, but he wasn't able to take down the beast yet. The beast had a constantly deployed lightning field around it, and although Damien had a relative immunity to lightning, he still sensed danger. Slashing the air, Damien created multiple spatial tiers and sent them towards the beast as if they were flying blades. This was a new interpretation of bladeless he had created to attack from range. Along with this, he was sending superheated beams of plasma at the hawk. However, these attacks only landed occasionally. The lightning field tore apart the beams of plasma and ignored the heat, while the lightning hawk used its speed to evade the spatial tiers. It wasn't all for naught, though. From the other side, projectiles of ice were constantly shot out, attempting to weaken the hawk. The ground was also frozen into permafrost as Zara turned the environment in her favor. The field of lightning slowly dwindled as the hawk took more damage. One of its legs had already been severed by a spatial tier, while many small cuts existed on its body. Suddenly, tens of tendrils emerged from the hawk's shadow in an attempt to bind it. In its efforts to combat the tendrils, it was subjected to 5 plasma beams that drilled through its body. As the hawk screeched in pain, the lightning field that protected it vanished. It was time for a pure offensive. From its left, Zara pounced, her whole body coated in icy armor. Her claws slashed out, forcing the hawk to dodge before her teeth sunk into its wing, promptly ripping it off. After taking the hawk's ability to fly and disabling its mobility, the rest of the fight was smooth sailing. Another 5 minutes later, Damien teleported directly in front of the hawk and let out the fatal strike. Void Sword Art Third Step, Spatial Collapse. Space bent and twisted, leaving only a mangled corpse in its wake. As the experience piled in, Damien quickly devoured the corpse. Although it didn't help him improve his physical stats, The essence went directly into a specific area in his body, leading him to gain new insights into the element. Although he still had no idea what this part of his body was, he had discovered it when he was trying to gain an in-depth understanding of his void physique. It was both ever-present and ethereal, and all he knew about it was that it was the place his affinity stemmed from. Looking at his status, Damien had a satisfied grin on his face. In the past month, he and Zara had solely focused on confronting third-class beasts, especially those with fiercer auras, leading to their immense improvement. Zara's ice was now strong enough to cause permafrost, as she did with the ground earlier, and while Damien didn't have any significant improvements, his level had risen to 95. He was aiming to reach third class within 2 months, but it seemed he wouldn't even need that long. Within another half a month at most, he'd reach that level. On the other side of the mountain, Catherine was having even more significant improvements. In the past month, she had also been confronting only third-class beasts, increasing her combat prowess by large margins. Her pain amplification illusions had once again been improved, and her level was already at 99, the peak of second class. She only needed to kill a few more beasts to reach her next class change. Due to this, she had already started making her way towards Damien. It was imperative that the first thing she does when she achieves third class was to brag about it to his face. On her way, she spotted many beasts and slew them without much thought until something interesting caught her eye. One of the many strings she saw connecting to unknown places was actually close by, and its color was bright gold. She knew what this color signified, as it was the color of Damien's string when they first met. It was a string that signified opportunity. Following the path the string showed her, Catherine ended up in the middle of a large clearing. In front of her, she saw a large dilapidated stone slab with writing on its surface. "While my death may be certain, my will and tenacity will never fade. To the next generation who is fated to see this message, partake in my trial, test thy will, and receive my legacy." Although it was her first time seeing one in person, it wasn't hard to guess what this slab was. The entrance to a legacy tomb. She didn't think twice about entering, quickly moving forward, but she was forced to stop. Her eyes were throbbing, alerting her of hidden danger. Without another thought, she backed away. Whatever is inside of that tomb isn't something I can handle alone. I'll meet up with Damien and Zara before we try to do it together. Catherine didn't know why she was born with these eyes, but they had never led her astray. Whenever she followed the path they showed her, she'd end up immensely benefiting or evading looming danger. This was the reason why Catherine had avoided the pursuit of the supremacist faction within the Adelaire Empire while she was out adventuring alone, and also the reason why she decided to recruit Damien for the escort mission a year ago, even though he was a total stranger. At that time, her only thought was to reap the benefits her eyes showed her. She'd have never expected that she would develop such intimate feelings for him. Smiling at the thought, Catherine continued moving in Damien's direction. "If that bastard doesn't man up and say something before we leave this realm, I swear on anything that I'll pounce on him." Chapter 69, Legacy Tomb 1. It didn't take long for Catherine to meet up with Damien and Zara. After finding the legacy tomb, she stopped hunting beasts altogether and blazed her way directly towards them. The legacy tomb's rewards were the most important thing at the moment. Damien was immensely surprised feeling a human aura enter his detection range, this feeling intensifying when he saw it was Catherine. After all, what were the chances that the two of them would end up teleported close to each other in the vastness of the secret realm? But he didn't dwell too much on this fact. He was more than happy to travel with her. Zara was the same, abandoning Damien and rushing towards her friend the second she sensed her. Before he could say anything, Catherine spoke up. "We can talk on the way. I found a legacy tomb nearby that I'll need your help clearing." Damien's eyes brightened at the mention of a legacy tomb before he hopped onto Zara's back and beckoned Catherine to join him. "All right, Zara can fly fastest out of the three of us, so let's travel this way." Nodding, Catherine joined him on Zara's back. After giving Zara the directions to the tomb, she started making conversation with Damien. "So, what level are you at right now? Just so you know, I'm already at level 99. Damien smirked. "Oh, you haven't stepped into third class yet, and here I thought our little princess was faster than that." Frowning slightly, Catherine softly punched his arm. "HMPH, I bet I'm still doing better than you, though. Stop stalling and tell me already." Shaking his head lightly, Damien gave her what she wanted. "I'm at level 98 right now, while Zara should be only a few beasts away from evolving." Although she was shocked by his speed, Catherine kept up her slight facade. "Well, I'll still be first to reach third class, so it doesn't matter anyway." She wasn't wrong. While Damien had just become level 98 while she was only 2 to 3 kills away from a class change. After bantering for a little while longer, they moved on to the main topic. "So what's this about a legacy tomb?" Damien asked. Catherine nodded as she proceeded to explain her encounter. From the part where she landed on the mountain, to the information she received from her father, and finally, her stumbling upon the stone slab. At this point, Catherine didn't care to hide her identity. Although she still hadn't told Damien her real name, she figured he had some solid guesses at who she was. Mentioning her father wasn't a problem. "A stone slab, huh? There was no need to call us for this, right? It'd be better if you raise your strength instead of prioritizing others," Damien chimed. Catherine couldn't help but smile at his consideration. "Of course I'd do that, stupid. But when I got near the tomb, I felt an immense sense of danger. I felt that it'd be best if we cleared it together." "So basically you're dragging me down with you," Damien said with fake unhappiness in his tone. "Yup, if I die you're coming with me," Catherine proclaimed shamelessly. As the two laughed and chatted, they reached the entrance of the legacy tomb. Zara landed in front of the slab before letting out a subtle growl. "What is it?" Damien asked. From Zara's thoughts, it seemed that there was a mysterious force that wouldn't allow her to move forward. She tried to push against this force, but her resistance only served to strengthen its rejection. It must be a mechanism that was placed to make sure none of the beasts in the mountain got hold of the legacy. Perhaps only humans or other outside races can access the tomb. Thinking for a bit, Damien spoke once more. "It's fine, Zara. While we explore the tomb, you should prioritize yourself." Zara whimpered in complaint, but after some convincing she relented. Smiling at her, Damien got an idea. "Zara, I expect you to be third class by the time we come out. Don't you remember that once you achieve that level we'll finally be able to talk for real instead of transmitting thoughts?" Zara's eyes brightened. Indeed, no matter how coherent her thoughts were, the only person she could speak with was Damien. She had a good friend in front of her that she wished to talk to, and also the Beast Empress that she had questions for. With her new goal in mind, Zara no longer complained, instead pushing Damien to leave so she could start training. All right, I'll see you when it's all over." Damien looked over at Catherine as they nodded to each other. Then they carefully walked forward and placed one hand each on the stone slab, while their other hands were interlocked. They didn't know if the tomb would separate them, so they wanted to take some small precautions. And only a second later, the two of them suddenly disappeared from the spot. Zara deeply stared at the area they were standing with a worried look in her eyes, but in the end, she chose to leave. She couldn't disappoint the expectations Damien had for her. When Damien opened his eyes, he was in a large cavern reminiscent of the dungeon, except this one wasn't straightforward. Instead, it was walled off and he could sense many twists and turns almost like a labyrinth. Luckily, he was still with Catherine, so he didn't need to worry about that. "Let's move forward carefully. We don't know what could be waiting for us here," Damien stated. Catherine nodded. "My father told me that some of the higher-level tombs are guarded by fourth-class beasts. The only problem is that there's no way to tell the level of a tomb before you enter one." The two walked vigilantly through the winding road provided to them before they reached their first split. When Catherine looked forward, there were 5 paths in front of her, but something felt off. "Which way should we go?" Damien glanced at her, confused. "What do you mean, which way? There's only a single path here." But there's clearly 5. It was then that Catherine realized the source of her off-putting feeling. These are illusions. Damien was surprised by her words but realized it made sense. He had never been able to see natural illusions or illusions created by arrays. Rather, he only saw the array itself. The only illusion he could see, even if it was just as a blurry silhouette, was Catherine's disguise. So when an illusion is being directly cast by someone, I can still see its shadow, but anything else simply doesn't register in my vision. Damien still didn't know exactly how his eyes worked, as he never sought to explore them, but he was slowly unraveling the various functions they contained. If it's illusions, then let me guide the way. I know you'll be able to see through them if you utilize your affinity, but it's best to save mana right now, he said as he held out his hand. Catherine nodded before grabbing his outstretched hand, leaving things to him. As they made their way through the twisting pathways of the labyrinth, Catherine was having mixed feelings. On one hand, she thoroughly enjoyed the feeling of being protected and watching Damien's tall back as he fearlessly led her through the labyrinth. But on the other hand, she hated the feeling of leeching off of him and not contributing to their success. She was the one who dragged him here, so she didn't want to hold him back. As if sensing her complicated emotions, Damien spoke. Don't think too much. I have things I'm good at while you have your own. Remember how great of a team we were during the Monolith capture event? Catherine nodded. In the first place, I was never one to doubt my intentions. I knew these things already, so why was I stressing? She didn't get the time to think too much about it before they entered a large cave. Without a word, the two of them jumped in separate directions before taking out their weapons. A massive flaming pillar emerged in the spot they were just standing, and out of it came a massive creature. Calling it a beast didn't seem to be the right word. It was humanoid in its form, but its body was made purely of molten lava and rocks. It seemed to be some sort of golem. The golem's attack patterns were strangely similar to the first third class the two had ever faced together, the man named Adrian. Due to their experience fighting someone who wielded lava, they didn't have a hard time defeating it. Besides, they were much stronger than they were back then. Wind would only boost the fire, so Catherine didn't use it much, instead opting to confuse the golem with her illusions. Its intelligence wasn't high at all, making this a simple task. She masked their locations while making the golem believe it was in a winning position. Meanwhile, Damien took care of the offense. He shot beams of plasma that worked surprisingly well against a golem made of lava, while utilizing his sword art to deal heavy damage. Tens of spatial blades shot out without pause, slowly severing each of the golem's limbs before he landed a fatal strike, decapitating it. The fight with the golem truly wasn't worth mentioning, ending in less than half an hour before the two gathered once more and continued past the cave they were currently in. The next area was a large, empty space. Unlike the previous scenery, which was mostly natural, this room showed clear signs of human interference. It resembled a throne hall, but much smaller than it should be, as if the owner of this hall couldn't fathom truly titling himself an emperor. As the two walked forward, a strange force brushed past their bodies, making them vigilant. A sudden, irresistible sensation overcame them, causing them to feel unnaturally drowsy. The two of them quickly approached each other, thinking that they were going to be teleported somewhere, but they didn't have enough time. By the time their hands had clasped together, everything had already faded to blackness. Chapter 70, Legacy Tomb 2. Damien, wake up. Within a small bedroom filled with various posters from his favorite anime and manga, a frail teenage boy opened his eyes. Where am I? His thoughts were jumbled as he struggled to get his memories in order. Suddenly, the door to his room burst open. In walked a beautiful middle-aged woman with deep amethyst eyes. Damien Void, if you don't wake up and start getting ready in the next 5 minutes, just see how I deal with you. Why, yes, Mom, the boy hurriedly replied as he jumped out of bed, only to realize he was only in his underwear at the moment. Blushing slightly, he covered his body. Seeing his actions, his mother let out a small giggle. Little boy, if you keep acting so girlish, I'll have to make sure you truly are my son instead of my daughter." Mom," he complained. "Oh, right, school." In his embarrassment, he had completely forgotten why he got out of bed in the first place. Today was Monday, August 27th, the first day of school. What should I wear?" he thought as he rummaged through his closet. It took him a whole 10 minutes to decide, but even then he still went with a normal short-sleeve black t-shirt and sweatpants. Grabbing his backpack, which had already been packed a few days ago, he rushed down the stairs. "Whoa, buddy," a familiar man said as he raised his head from the TV in the living room. "Be careful not to slip when you're running so fast." Damien smiled as he ran over to the man. "Dad," tears started flowing from his eyes. Surprised by the sudden outburst, Damien's father hugged him back. All right, you're already in your first year of high school. You can't be crying like a little kid anymore." Damien let out a light sound of acknowledgement as he continued to cry into his dad's chest. He didn't know why his emotions were flaring up like this, but he remembered tidbits of the dream he had last night. He was trapped in darkness, endlessly killing without a second of rest. No matter how much he called for help, none came. He didn't want to even think about those terrifying scenes again. Time passed slowly as his emotions calmed. At some point, even his mother had joined the group hug. Once again blushing, Damien backed away. "I'm sorry." His parents smiled and his father spoke as he lightly patted Damien's head. "What is there to be sorry about? You know that we're here for you if you need anything. We're your parents, not some random strangers on the street." Damien smiled as tears welled up in his eyes again, but not wanting to further make a fool out of himself, he held them back. The family made their way over to the dining table as they had a small breakfast. Throughout this time, Damien smiled as he felt nostalgic. Nostalgia, but I see them every day. However, he didn't ponder on it too much. Damien took out his phone, checking the time. I'm going to miss the bus." Saying a quick goodbye to his parents, Damien rushed out of the house. Luckily, he was able to reach the bus stop on time and board without problems. "Yo, Damien. How was your summer? You played the new Souls game yet?" Several greetings flooded him as he took his seat. Smiling lightly, he kindly responded to each and every one. He was really glad that he had these friends of his, as they made his days at school worth it. The bus drove on its route, picking up many students on its way. The environment soon became rowdy until they reached a certain stop. Everyone quieted down. After all, this was the stop where the school's beauty queen joined them. Through the open doors of the bus, a cute girl with dark blue hair and eyes walked in. Her gaze panned the whole bus before she found a spot to sit. Damien was blushing profusely. This girl was Alina, and he had been crushing on her since they were in elementary school, yet she still didn't know about it. Rather, he doubted she even knew he existed. He just silently watched from his corner. Her smile brightened the environment around her, and every move she made would make even the air dance with joy. It was as if she was a fairy descended onto the mortal world. Damien, if you like her so much, why don't you just talk to her?" Damien's friend, Bryce, said with a mischievous grin. "Why, you know I can't. She's too good for me." Damien had a slightly depressed look on his face, but he quickly hid it, changing the topic. "Guys, you won't believe what I found in the game yesterday." Middle school boys had the attention span of a fish, so they naturally followed his narration of the epic adventure he had in the game, forgetting all about the previous conversation. As the boys messed around, Alina slightly turned around, glancing at Damien before sighing. "He's so cute, but he never comes to talk to me. Am I not good enough for him?" Time passed, and the school day continued like every other day. Damien went to his math and science class in the morning, and English and history in the afternoon. At lunch, he had a special meal prepared for him by his mother. That led to an embarrassing moment when he accidentally showed off the note stating, "I love you," from Mom to his whole friend group. Damien decided to stay after school and partake in some club activities before he went home, but he had forgotten that his parents were both busy today. "I guess I'll just have to walk," he thought of himself. He didn't do it often, but he had walked home from school before, so he already knew the way. He put in his headphones and listened to his favorite music as he celebrated a successful first day of school. Standing at an intersection, Damien waited for the walk light to turn green when he suddenly noticed something. There was a girl walking through the road with headphones in, seemingly unaware of the fact that it wasn't time to walk yet. A truck came swerving down the road, headed straight for the girl. She's going to get hit. Damien was always watching anime, so he knew that situations like this were never good. He disregarded everything and ran towards the girl. "Watch out! Hey!" he yelled, but she couldn't hear him. Without another choice, he ran up to her and tackled her out of the way, narrowly dodging the oncoming truck that zoomed past them. Looking down at the girl, Damien questioned, "Hey, are you okay?" The girl shifted her head to look at him, seemingly in shock. She had just seen the truck pass by and knew what would have happened if he didn't push her. "Why, yes, I'm okay. Thank you so much for saving me." It was only then that Damien got a good look at her face, and to his surprise, it was Alina, his crush and the school beauty queen. It's no problem. I couldn't just stand by and watch someone get hurt," Damien replied. The second he saw who he saved, he immediately got too shy to speak coherently. Alina smiled. "He really is cute, not to mention he's my hero." And like that, life continued. After that incident, Alina would approach Damien more often, striking up conversation. This also led to him becoming less shy around her. By the time they finished their first year of high school, the two were best friends. And life kept going. By the end of the second year of high school, Damien and Alina were already dating. They would watch movies, go to parks, and she had even met his parents once, though that experience was too embarrassing for him to recount. And when he turned 16, a monumental event occurred. Damien and Alina were in his room as usual, chatting and laughing before she made a move. Without any notice, she kissed him. His face went bright red and he felt like he was dreaming, but he still tried to kiss her back. It was both of their first kisses, so it was pretty awkward. However, things didn't stop there. They continued kissing as their hands became wilder, and the following day, Damien woke up as a new man. "I really did it. I did it with Alina," he yelled as he jumped and celebrated in his room. Who would have thought that he would be so happy with the girl he once could only admire from afar? While he was jumping, a sudden headache hit him. Damien fell to his knees, unable to even scream in pain before he passed out. Scenes of carnage replayed in his head without pause. Gruesome monsters straight out of manga surrounded him as he killed them one by one. He wielded a sword in his right hand, but his entire left arm had been ripped off at some point. He wanted to wake up. He wanted to go back to the peaceful life he had been living so far. Many hours passed and Damien's eyelids slowly began fluttering. When he opened them, there was a light that wasn't there previously. Deeply sighing, he stood up. "It seems I can't continue living this facade anymore. In another few weeks of this, my ego will collapse due to the nature of this trial." At the end of the day, this place was an illusion. It couldn't fool Damien's eyes no matter how hard it tried. He had to admit that it took some time for him to realize it, but even after he did, he pretended to be oblivious. He wanted to revel in this peace for as long as he could. For this purpose, he had shut off his conscious thought and truly lived as the child version of himself. It was only due to the sudden headache and influx of memories that he woke up from his stasis. Shaking his head, he went downstairs to see his parents one more time. What greeted him was the familiar scenery of his father and mother enjoying themselves together, conversing as one made dinner while the other lazed around on the couch. Noticing Damien, they both smiled and greeted him. Damien tried to smile back, but it was clear how forced it was. "Is something wrong?" his mother asked with a worried look. Before Damien could respond, his dad beat him to it. I think I know what's going on, dear. Let me talk to him alone, man to man." Damien's father pulled him to a side room. Looking at the man in front of him, Damien could only feel a semblance of familiarity, but he was largely unknown. For this reason, Damien didn't know why he felt on the verge of tears just looking at his face. His father possessed a stern look on his face as he spoke. "Is it time for you to go?" Damien's eyes widened slightly, but noticing the time, it seemed he would leave for school soon. Yeah, I can't be late for school. However, his father didn't let him go. You know that's not what I meant. Damien looked into his father's eyes. They were an abyssal black that seemed like they could swallow anything. Slightly nodding, Damien responded, Yeah, I can't stay here any longer. His father sighed lightly. Although I'm not truly your father, this place simulated me perfectly, so I possess his memories. I don't know where you are or what you're doing right now, but I know that the real me would be dying to see you. Damien couldn't hold his anger. If you were dying to see me so much, then why did you leave? Do you know what happened to Mom when you were gone? How much stress she had to put herself through? Damien wanted to vent more, but he couldn't bring himself to do so. He always knew the pain hidden in his father's eyes. I know you have questions and I know I wronged you, but it's not my place to tell you the answers. I'm not your true father after all. Find him and then you can know the truth. Chapter 71, Legacy Tomb 3. Damien sighed once again. He always figured there was something special about his father. There was no way a man with such a temperament could have been born into a monolith society like Earth. Yet, he had no clue where to get the answers. Well, that comes later. I'm glad I got to see this version of the past, but it couldn't be further from the truth. If you want to force me to stay and break my will, it's impossible with just this much. Damien spoke to nobody in particular. Yet the world still reacted to his words. The comfy house he lived in as a child, the streets outside, and even his father that was smiling at him sadly started to disappear into flecks of light. I pray you never falter in your journey. With his last words said, his father entirely disappeared. Damien was now alone in a world of white. Something akin to a projector screen appeared before him, showing his true past. It didn't even start during high school, as his middle school life was riddled with bullying and ridicule. His father had already disappeared by this time, and his mother was never home. His first year of high school was the peak of this cycle of bad luck, though. That bus ride was filled with silence other than the occasional bullying he would face. Bryce was never his friend. Rather, he was a kid who did everything in his power to make Damien miserable. When Alina got on the bus, rather than encouraging him, Bryce had screamed out for everyone to hear that he had a crush on her. That was the incident that killed his thoughts of romance. His first year of high school was terrible. He never had friends, he flunked many of his classes, and he walked home not because of club activities, but because he could no longer stand the harassment. When he got home, his mother was never there. She was working 3 to 4 jobs at a time and never had the time for him. It had gotten so bad that he began to cut himself just to feel something other than depression. It was halfway through this period of depression that he had formally met Alina. It was a rather normal meeting at a bus stop, rather than him heroically saving her. However, that single meeting changed his life. She filled his world with smiles and showed him a different perspective on life. He realized how much effort his mother had put into giving him a healthy life, and he stopped harming himself. Then the world awakening came, leaving his mother in a coma before he could ever thank her for all her work. His life changed once again as he had no time to think about anything other than making sure she and himself survived. And finally, a few years later, he fell. Although Damien's backstory wasn't tragic and filled with death, it was something that could mentally traumatize any child on Earth. Damien developed trust issues. He stopped having the ability to share his problems, and he never allowed himself to receive support. Only after seeing the ideal future presented to him by the trial did he notice how much those years affected him. He still carried those trust issues and the many other scars he received back then. Though his body wasn't scarred due to his regeneration, he could still feel the cold blade he ran across his skin back then. The scenes on the projector ended, leaving Damien alone in the empty white room. He closed his eyes as he thought back to what he just experienced. It took him some time, but he managed to collect his thoughts. Looks like my strength isn't the only thing I need to improve. He actually appreciated this trial. It had shown him many flaws in himself that he wasn't self-aware enough to notice. It also reminded him of a few memories that had been subconsciously suppressed. When Damien opened his eyes again, he was back within that miniature throne hall. Next to him was a passed-out Catherine, seemingly going through the same trial. And indeed, that was exactly what she was going through. Catherine had been seeing scenes of her childhood. Her father was an emperor, so it was only natural for him to have a harem. He had around 100 wives that he married for various reasons, whether it be love or benefit. In reality, this harem was toxic, constantly fighting and scheming for his attention. But in the world she was in, they were extremely harmonious. Catherine had a sister that she used to love dearly, but as time went on, this sister of hers drifted away. She became fake and took after her mother, plotting against her siblings for the throne. Seeing the ugliness that's birthed in people when they're overcome by greed for status was one of the main reasons Catherine left the palace to become an adventurer. However, none of that existed in this world. Her sister was her best friend, and rather than go alone, she would adventure together with her sister, enjoying the sights of the world as they grew older. And finally, her mother. Her mother dies mysteriously when Catherine was 12 years old, and nobody was ever able to find out the cause of her death, but Catherine knew. Her mother had been killed by one of the other harem members. Catherine's mother was widely known to be the emperor's favorite wife. He was also the first woman he ever married and did it purely out of love. This was also one of the main reasons the emperor favored Catherine so much. In this world, her dead mother was alive and well, able to be a true parent to her daughter. Even though Catherine possessed an illusion affinity, she didn't have an immunity like Damien. She was truly susceptible to losing her ego within this perfect world. And not just susceptible, it almost happened. She was drowned in the pleasure of the peaceful life she had where she didn't lose anyone or anything. She went on an adventure and met Damien, becoming partners. They went on countless quests together and over many years sprouted a budding romance. They got married in the imperial capital, with her mother standing witness and blessing the marriage. Catherine had everything she could ask for, but it couldn't stay that way. She had obligations in the real world. She had people she cared about that were waiting for her. Her pupils began throbbing. Although they weren't the same as Damien's, they had their own uniqueness that helped her break out of the situation. Rather than the calm approach Damien took, Catherine directly broke the illusion with force. She raged at the fact that she was shown something like this. She hated that she almost fell prey to this mundane life. She imposed her illusions onto the one she was stuck in, using the pressure to make quick advancements and insights before the illusion cracked like glass. Just like Damien, she was left in the White Room. She was shown her past where her mother died, where her father couldn't provide her with too much lest she be killed off as well, where her sister betrayed her in pursuit of power. She saw everything once again as tears began flowing from her eyes. She couldn't take it anymore. She needed to see someone she trusted, someone she cared for. She hadn't felt this vulnerable since the day her mom had died. When the White Room faded, the first thing she saw was Damien. Without any words, she leapt into his arms and cried. She cried until she had no more tears left. Truthfully, Damien had also woken up with tears streaking down his face. The only reason he didn't completely break down was that he had done so in front of his parents before he left his dream. Damien didn't blame Catherine in the slightest for her behavior, patting her back as she calmed herself down. "Are you okay, Catherine?" he said in a soft voice. He didn't want to startle her after she had just returned to normal. She raised her head to look at him with hazy eyes. Slowly, the fog of her disguise melted away, revealing her true face to Damien in all its glory. Although he had been looking at this face since the first time they met, there was something different about it when she chose to show him herself. Her lips parted as she spoke. "No more Catherine Hart, my name is Rose, Rose Adelaire." Then she leaned her head forward as her lips connected with his. Chapter 72, Third Class 1. Damien's eyes widened in shock as he tried to process what was going on. He knew they'd eventually reach this point, but he didn't expect it to happen so soon, not to mention the current circumstances. while every fiber of his being screamed at him to respond in kind and kiss her back. He couldn't bring himself to do it. Regardless of her reasoning, with the way things played out, he'd feel like any progression in their relationship that happened now would be taking advantage of her weakness. Damien grabbed her shoulders and gently pulled her away from his lips, though he still allowed her to lean on his body. The look of betrayal on her face truly made him feel like an asshole, but it had to be done. "Why you don't want me?" she asked in a weak voice. "Kath, no, Rose. Of course I want you, but look at yourself right now. Would you ever be the type of person to even ask if I wanted you before doing this kind of thing? Knowing you, you'd pounce first and ask questions later." Rose blushed at his words but couldn't deny it. After all, that was her plan if he didn't confront her before they left the secret realm. Suddenly, she felt a sharp pain in her forehead. "Ow, what was that for?" she yelled at Damien, who had just flicked her. "First, return to your normal self. If you can still act so bold at that time, I'll gladly accept it," Damien replied with a smirk. She knew he was right, and it only made her appreciate him more. Right now, she was still shaken from her experience in the trial. She craved some sort of intimacy and chose the first thing she thought of, which was Damien. Putting aside the fact that kissing Damien was the most prioritized form of intimacy in her mind, just the fact that she was craving such a thing for support made this a bad start to a proper relationship. If they started things off like that, it would only lead to a future of toxicity and codependence. This type of relationship would never be healthy, most likely leading to the emotional breakdown of one or both parties. Rose slightly nodded, but she still refused to get off of him. She cuddled further into his chest and appreciated his warmth. Although Damien wanted to tell her they had more important things to do, he noticed that she had already fallen asleep. "This silly woman, does she seriously have so much trust in me?" He couldn't suppress the slight grin that began to form on his face. If he thought about it, that was technically his first kiss. With his social life on Earth, it was obvious he didn't have a girlfriend, and ever since the World Awakening, he hadn't had the slightest thought of romance. However, thinking about his first kiss brought up another memory. Although it wasn't real, his 16-year-old self had still kissed Alina. Thinking about that experience, Damien's expression turned complicated. It'd be a lie to say that he didn't have any feelings for Alina. He didn't know how it functioned, but the trial had perfectly replicated every person in his life. Even Alina was a carbon copy of her true self. Even if the memories themselves were fake, the experiences were fresh in his mind. Besides that, he couldn't confidently say he had no feelings for her true self back on Earth. Before they had ever met, he had a crush on her. Although that crush had died, with them being so close for such a long time, it was impossible for him to feel no attraction. Only, time didn't wait for him to realize his feelings. Time didn't allow him to even consider the possibility of a relationship back then. Thinking about the tsundere-like actions Alina would show sometimes, Damien truly felt the need to curse time itself. As his thoughts wandered in this direction, he once again looked at the princess that was sleeping on his chest. "So basically, I have feelings for two women like some sort of creepy playboy." He sighed at his own thoughts. He had no idea how he would handle this. Perhaps if he hadn't spent that year within the trial dating Alina, if he didn't pile up experiences of what could have been, he wouldn't be having this problem. He hadn't even seen her in 3 years, so he thought it'd be impossible for anything to develop. Unbeknownst to him, a certain someone was watching his every action. Seeing the complicated light in his eyes, Rose thought of an old saying her mother used to tell her. Powerful and charismatic people will never end up with only a single partner. If you ever end up falling for one of these types, your best option is to secure the top position in his heart. At that time, Rose was more confused about why her mother said people instead of men, but it didn't take a genius to understand the nuance behind her words now that she was grown. The thought of having a reverse harem made her want to laugh, but she held it in so she could keep observing Damien. She knew she had put Damien in a tough spot with her sudden actions, but she didn't know he had another woman in his heart. Rather, She knew there wasn't another woman who could make him ponder like that until after the trial had ended. If he experienced the same thing I did, then maybe it was someone from his past. If Damien knew how much Rose had deduced based simply off the complicated look in his eyes, he'd probably be terrified. But Rose wasn't stuck on the who or the why of the situation. She was taking her mother's words to heart. She would sit in the number one spot among any women Damien would gain in the future, not through scheming and deceit, but love and aid. This was the best way to earn her place with him. Rose grew up within an imperial harem. She knew how vile things could get if too many women or the wrong type of women were introduced into a family. She wouldn't allow such a situation to happen. Let's limit him to 3, no maybe 5 HMPH 8 at most. If he wants more than that, he'll have to fight me for it. Clueless to the fact that his love life was being thoroughly planned out by the woman on his chest, Damien concluded his thoughts. When it comes time to have the "what are we" conversation, I'll just talk to Rose about it directly. Proud of his decision, Damien slightly floated inside his mind. He, imagine me as an Ice Guy protagonist with a huge harem. That'd be pretty funny. Damien didn't even want a harem like that. He'd seen how that worked, and it seemed like too much work and trouble to deal with. If he's having multiple women, he'd make sure to keep the number small. Heart of ice, Damien. You must keep your will firm. Damien had spent a few hours in his thoughts after he finished up with the harem issue as he figured out his plans for the rest of the time they had within the secret realm. By his estimation, a month should have gone by in real time while they were in the trial. That meant they only had 3 months left. 3 months. For the next 3 months, we disregard everything and climb to the peak. If we can't make it by the end, we'll come back to one of the legacy tombs we find along the way. Damien concluded his thoughts when he felt some movement on his chest. Rose slowly pretended to wake up before glancing around the room. With all the drama that was going on, she forgot they were in the middle of a trial. Relax, Damien said as he noticed her vigilance. That should have been the last trial. All that's left is for us to reap the rewards. They stood up and walked towards the small throne at the end of the hall. Damien didn't miss the fact that Rose didn't let go of his hand, but he ignored it. When the two entered within 10 meters of the throne, a new stone slab entered their vision. To thy who hath completed my trial and proven thy worthiness, I bestow my techniques and treasures. Use them wisely and protect the world you were born into, as it shall always be somewhere you can consider home. Damien realized that it wasn't just the beasts that were meant to be blocked from entering this tomb. Rather, it was everyone that wasn't born on the Aparan continent as well. If so, why am I able to enter? Damien couldn't come up with a good answer. Pushing the question to the back of his mind, Damien went forward and put his hand on the slab like he had done when they first entered the tomb, with Rose joining him soon after. The floor split into 2 parts as a massive storage space was revealed. Countless gold coins were strewn about randomly, but these were only the lowest tier of treasures. Besides them, there was a section of shelves lined with countless numbers of every type of potion Damien could imagine. Recovery potions for stamina and mana, healing potions, various tonics, and even a single bottle of elixir. They must have had a ton of this stuff back in the ancient eras. Damien mused as he collected everything into his inventory. Meanwhile, Rose's focus was somewhere else. It was a shelf much smaller than the others, but the contents were insanely valuable to her. This shelf contained tomes of this expert's entire knowledge on illusions and their use. As the legacy of someone who could even create an illusion as realistic as the one in the final trial, it was sure to be priceless. Rose immediately pocketed the books. She knew Damien wouldn't be needing them anyway since his affinities didn't align. The final item in the room was an ancient broadsword with golden etchings on its surface. It was still in good condition, but it wasn't a type of weapon that either of them used, so Damien was just planning to pocket it. But the second he touched it, something within his inventory began vibrating intensely. It was his own sword. When he took it out, as if it had a mind of its own, it shot towards the ancient blade. Without even his invocation, his Devour skill activated as the billowing black aura covered the old sword. Then, instead of retreating to his body like it usually did, it surrounded his sword. It was only then that Damien remembered the name of his sword. Devourer. The billowing black cloud slowly got absorbed into the sword, which was still shaking as if it would shatter any second. Then it stopped. There were no loud sounds or cool messages. The process ended silently. When Damien grabbed the sword, though, he could immediately feel the difference. Devourer. SSS rank. A sword made by a talented blacksmith to embody the traits of its wielder. It is bestial and ferocious, but carries its own brand of elegance. This sword was made for the sole purpose of devouring its enemies. During its creation, it birthed the special effect, amplification, to aid its owner. Through the devouring of a higher rank artifact, it has awakened its true form. Devoured essence needed for evolution 39%. Well, that's new. Chapter 73, Third Class 2. Once they had collected their rewards, the two of them immediately left the Legacy Tomb. While it was a safe environment for them to practice, their main goal had now reverted to reaching third class. Leaving was just as simple as entering, as the two of them placed their hands on another stone slab that sat on the throne and were teleported out. At that point, no words needed to be said. They looked into each other's eyes and grinned before rushing off in different directions to reach their class change. Rose was the first to reach that level. It didn't even take her much time at all, since after killing the lava golem, she only needed a single kill to get there. She quickly found a third-class beast called an Obsidian Panther and initiated battle. Though she hadn't assimilated the knowledge of the expert who left the Legacy Tomb, her illusions had already made immense improvements through her destruction of the trial illusion. She led the panther by its nose, creating false earth spikes that stimulated real pain, using illusions to impose fatigue onto the beast, and using her wind affinity for attack power. When she finally killed the beast, a holographic window appeared before her. Your achievements have reached the required threshold to change your class. Choose a new class from the list below. Choose a class. 1. Scythe Spirit. 2. Mystic Diviner. 3. Sage. 4. Spectral Phantasm. Rose thoughtfully gazed at her options, but she wasn't an indecisive person. Plus, she always had her eyes that told her the right direction to move. Right now, they were pointing towards the fourth option. You have become a spectral phantasm. Your illusions gain further abilities to manipulate the very essence of reality, though truly doing such a thing is currently impossible. Your abilities have become capable of affecting a large scale, creating a pseudo-domain. Your existence becomes more elusive, increasing your concealment abilities. Your legends have been enhanced. By becoming a third-class being, you have obtained the qualifications to choose a subclass. Choose a subclass. 1. Wind Archmage. 2. Enchantress. 3. Blacksmith. 4. Alchemist. 5. Beast Tamer. Rose received the influx of information about her main class with a smile. She had heard about the concept of domains. They were something one could only form once they reached the Grandmaster level of control. Having a pseudo-domain simply from the power of her class meant the class itself held immense potential. Just like Damien, Rose didn't pay much attention to the subclass, choosing the Wind Archmage class as it would best suit her needs. Finally, she called out her status. Status. Rosa Delaire. Human. Female, age 22. Level 100 Spectral Phantasm, Wind Archmage. Experience value, 0/150,000. Title S, Child of Destiny. Affinities, Illusion Wind. Physique NA. Magic Power 12,000. STR 290. AGI 320. Def 335. INT 315. Dex 325. Skills Wind Magic Level Max, Phantasm Magic Level 1, Mid-Level Regeneration Level 8, Adelaire Scythe Art Level 5, Fate Discernment Level 3, Elusive Throne Level 1. Trait S, Eyes of Destiny. Rose nodded with a satisfied smile. She was excited to try out her new phantasm magic and the elusive throne skill, but she figured it could wait until she met up with Damien. Besides these two, there were no changes unless she counted her abnormally high defense stat, but she didn't. This was because she already knew the reason for it. After the tournament, where she ran into a problem with how weak her physical body was in comparison to her magical ability, she decided to immediately invest her stat potion into defense. Rose sat down to fully digest her gains before she rendezvoused with Damien. I wonder how long it'll take him to catch up. Damien didn't take long to meet her expectations. He was still a level behind her, so it took him an extra week to catch up, but he eventually got there. Plus, since Rose wasn't continuously leveling up after her class change, he didn't fall behind. As Damien pulled his sword out of a third-class mountain golem, a familiar system window popped up in front of his eyes. Your achievements have reached the required threshold to change your class. Choose a new class from the list below. Choose a class. 1. Sword Saint. 2. Beast Tamer. 3. Sage. 4. Celestial. 5. Emperor. Damien was surprised by the new list of classes he was given. Although it was clear which one catered to his spatial attribute, it sounded a bit too overpowered. Besides that, there was also Emperor, which he didn't know qualified as a class. But thinking about how Farmer was also a class option, he stopped thinking about it and picked the obvious choice. You have become a Celestial. The records exist for that purpose, to record. At the base of all your achievements is a single wish, to travel the stars and to return to your origin planet. Through your achievements, your legends have resonated with this wish, allowing for it to present itself as a class. A Celestial has the power to call upon the stars and gains an intrinsic connection with them. They are not gods by birth, nor are they immensely powerful without reason, but their potential is immense. Perhaps at the peak of power, a Celestial may even obtain the ability to forge stars and galaxies with but a thought. By becoming a third-class being, you have obtained the qualifications to choose a subclass. Choose a subclass. 1. Lightning Archmage. 2. Priest. 3. Blacksmith. 4. Alchemist. 5. Beast Tamer. Damien once again chose the Lightning subclass. He still didn't understand their purpose much, but he assumed it was the reason he was able to progress fast with an element that wasn't his inherent affinity. Most of his attention was focused on his main class. A familiar rush of information flooded his mind, but Damien didn't care for it. With there being no natural stars within the secret realm besides its moon and sun, he didn't feel the connection the system spoke of. What he focused on was the first system window that popped up once he had chosen his class. My wish resonated with my legends. Damien tried to wrap his head around this concept. Up until this point, he had no idea what the system even meant when it said his legends were enhanced, but he may have just gained his first clue. My achievements make up my legend. The topic of his achievements. He thought about what he had done since he surfaced on Aparen, and after review, he realized that most of the actions he had taken were indeed for the purpose of returning home. While that was one of his priorities in the dungeon, it wasn't even close to being at the forefront. That was naturally his will to survive. With third class achieved, all that was left for Damien to do before meeting up with Rose and calling Zara back was to check his status. Status. Damien Void. Half human, half beast. Male, age 20. Level 100, Celestial Lightning Archmage. Experience value, 0/150,000. Title S, Bearer of the Void Physique Evolver. Affinities, Space Lightning. Physique, Void Physique. Magic Power, 15,000. STR, 350. AGI, 340. Def, 355. INT, 345. Dex, 340. Skills, Warp Level 10, Dimensional Magic Level 1, High Level Regeneration Level Max, Void Sword Art Level 3, Mana Sense Level Max, Devour Level 5, Vector Control Level 8, Lightning Magic Level Max, Inventory. Trait S, Shock Absorption, All-Seeing Eyes Level 4, Dragon's Breath, and Antimatrix. There hadn't been many changes, but the ones that occurred shocked him. First off, his mana capacity had increased by around 10,000 points, which was obscene to him. Although he had already sensed this type of number on the third class he fought before, it was still shocking for him to see it reflected in his own status. The next shock was that his spatial control had evolved into dimensional magic. He didn't know the extent to which dimensional magic could work, but its name alone sounded extremely overpowered. Damien shook his head. No, Malcolm told me that third class was the true start to cultivation, so it makes sense for the abilities to become this exaggerated. Besides, leveling this up will probably take way longer than any skill I've had before. Thinking along those lines, Damien looked at his Devour skill. Although his regeneration hadn't evolved, it was already at max level. Damien assumed that there were some criteria he had yet to meet for skill evolution. The Devour skill, however, was still in its original state, with no skill evolutions, and had been stuck at level 5 since he devoured the wyvern in the dungeon. That was around a year and a half ago. It's probably due to its relation with my void physique. Knowing how that thing works, it won't be easy to satiate this damn skill. Damien concluded his thoughts and decided to sift through the insights he had gained by his rank up. Sitting in a meditative posture, Damien entered his mind. This was something he learned how to do subconsciously not long ago. In fact, he only learned it during the last trial of the Legacy Tomb. When he did this, Damien immediately felt the influx of knowledge. It wasn't just a connection to the stars he now had, he could also call upon their power. He didn't know the extent to which this ability worked quite yet, but he could feel the blazing heat of the sun cascade onto him and blend with his magic power. Opening his hand, he willed a small flame to rise. Although it was only the size of a lighter flame, its heat was immense, causing scorch marks to form on the nearby ground. However, Damien couldn't keep this up for long. Just the single minute he had kept the flame in his palm had cost him half of his mana. With such an immense mana capacity, it was clear to see how much of a burden using true Sunfire would be. However, this caveat didn't lessen Damien's excitement in the slightest. If he could do this much with a small sun like the one present in the secret realm, what about the true sun? And what about the countless other stars that constantly illuminated the night sky? Are planets considered stars too? Damien couldn't wait to find out, but he didn't let himself get drunk on his current power level. Gazing into the sky, he watched the second cloud layer, trying to pierce through it and witness the scenes taking place on the mountain peak. A fallen god. Even if it's a dead god, a god is still something that could kill me without even sparing a single thought. That's a sixth-class being. Considering the amount of power Malcolm has, destroying a city would be light work. So what about a god? Damien didn't want to wait any longer to find out for himself. He quickly went to meet up with the two girls so they could unravel the truth behind Godspark Mountain and perhaps gain some immense benefits in the process. Chapter 74, Mountain Peak 1. Damien and Rose were quick to meet, as they both headed to each other the second they finished assimilating their gains. The only one left was Zara. "You were pretty slow to reach third class," Rose teased in a condescending tone. She might have tried to sound bold, but she was inwardly shocked. The number of threads connecting to Damien had drastically increased, but none of them were connected to people. She could only see the location of 2 threads at the moment, but the most obvious one was connected to the sun itself. How can one have a karmic connection to the freaking sun? Still, she had no intention to back down. "I might have been slower, but it doesn't mean you can beat me," Damien replied with a smirk. The two kept walking towards each other without pause. I don't know about that one. How about we test that assumption?" Rose replied, still closing the distance. "Yeah, let's test that assumption. Let's see how you run from me this time," Damien said. At this point, they were already directly in front of each other, with only mere inches separating their faces. Even as they stared into each other's eyes with bubbling fighting intent, the atmosphere retained its pink color. Suddenly, a cheerful voice filled with innocence resounded in the area. "Damien!" The two of them snapped their heads in the direction of the sound. Although this new voice should have had them on alert, it didn't do such a thing in the slightest. In fact, Damien was grinning from ear to ear like a fool. Out of the woods came a large black wolf, whose appearance didn't match her voice in the slightest. Until she began to shrink, that is. Her towering body slowly became only around 3/4 ths the size of Damien's body. Now, with her silky black fur, beautiful angel-like wings, and innocent golden eyes, she truly did look cute. "You're finally here, Zara. How is it? Are you enjoying the ability to speak?" Zara rushed forward and pounced on Damien, licking his face like a house pet. "In." She let out sounds of affirmation as she expressed her joy. Damien laughed as well, petting her large body as he attempted to calm her down. She only acted like this when she got too excited. "Sigh, how could Zara forget about me already? I think I'll really cry," said Rose with mock disappointment. It was only then that Zara remembered they had another companion, Catherine. Just like with Damien, Zara pounced on her, but Rose remained unfazed in her acting. "Sob, you only remembered me after I said something. How could you?" "No, Catherine, I'm sorry," Zara begged in an innocent voice. This surprised Damien. Her voice sounded like that of an 18-year-old girl, but her mannerisms and such were still very innocent. "Well, it's not like she has any knowledge, but I figured that from staying with me for so long, she'd have learned a thing or two. Maybe it's just a beast thing," Damien didn't know. Rose wanted to tease Zara a bit more, but her plans were halted by a sudden flick on the forehead. "All right, look how sad you made her. Stop teasing her now." Rose was a little disappointed but still quit her acting, leaving Zara confused. Damien sighed. "Zara, who knew you'd be so innocent? Well, just remember not to take anything Rose says too seriously." Zara tilted her head. Rose, who was that? This action made Damien realize that he had never explained Rose's situation to her. Taking a bit of time, the two of them sat Zara down and did some explaining. To their dismay, this only ended with Zara saying, "Catherine is Rose now," and dropping the matter altogether. After conversing for a bit longer, Damien finally got the chance to inspect Zara's gains. Her size, which had become even more massive, was an obvious indication of her growth, and he wasn't disappointed by what he saw. The swirling blue and gray mana around her had thickened considerably, indicating both an increase in her power and mana capacity. Not only that, Zara's body seemed to be even tougher than his own currently. After he congratulated her for this, Damien decided to tell the other two about his plan. He reiterated the story of the fallen god's legacy, and also explained that he felt a sort of calling to the peak of the mountain. "A calling, huh? To be honest, I've been feeling something similar as well," Rose suddenly said. It was true, even without the indication from her eyes, Rose could feel something at the peak of the mountain beckoning her. "I don't know what kind of beast we will have to face at the peak, but if it's a fourth class, I don't think we currently stand a chance at defeating it," Damien said. "That being said, it shouldn't be a problem for us to injure it if we work together." Rose nodded. "If we can hinder its mobility, it should be enough to allow us to enter whatever legacy tomb or structure resides at the peak. That's all we need at the moment." Now that he had their affirmation, he didn't need to wait any longer. "All right, let's go straight past the second cloud layer and test our newfound power a bit before we continue up the mountain. Zara, how about you show me how fast you've gotten?" Zara nodded excitedly as she once again grew to her original height. "Yeah, I'm super fast now, don't worry." Smiling, Damien grabbed Rose's hand and teleported onto Zara's back. "Let's go then." Zara unfurled her wings and vigorously flapped them. It only took a single flap for them to zoom into the air. Damien even had to use his vector control to maintain his and Rose's place on her back. Ha ha ha, Damien roared with laughter. Rose was the opposite, clinging to him like he was her last lifeline. The trio rushed up the mountainside, and in only a few hours' time, they breached the second cloud layer. Even after Zara slowed down, Rose continued to cling to Damien. Whether she was doing this out of remnant fear or just using the excuse to hug him was unknown, but Damien didn't mind either way. He even wanted to see if he could get a reaction out of her, wrapping his arm around her waist and pulling her closer. Rose jerked slightly at the sudden action but didn't evade him. Damien couldn't see her face, so he used his mana sense to cover her. It was then that he noticed she was blushing profusely. Definitely worth it. He wanted to tease her about it, but figuring that it would result in her pulling away from his embrace, he refrained from doing so. While this was happening, the trio traveled halfway up the mountain peak. Even if the third layer of the mountain was filled with only third-class beasts, there was still a distinction between them. Everyone in the group could kill early third-class beasts alone before they even reached this level. So for them to be challenged, they needed to head to an area with higher-level beasts. Zara landed within the forest that made up the mountain slope, and Damien and Rose dismounted. Damien looked at the now visible sky. It was still bright with daylight. Okay, let's meet back here when night falls. After that, we'll rest a bit and continue our climb. The other two nodded, and they parted ways. Damien rushed through the foliage, marveling at the new scenery on this part of the mountain. Various flowers bloomed and painted the forest in a vast array of colors. The sunlight shone through the foliage of the trees, turning the painting into a mosaic, and many beasts lurked around, giving the painting life. It was truly beautiful. The trees in this layer were massive, probably to accommodate the huge beasts that resided here. After all, most third-class beasts were larger than a normal two-story building, while Zara was larger than even a 3- or 4-story building. It'd be quite the comical sight to watch these massive beasts attempt to hide within normally sized trees. He didn't concentrate on this for too long, though, as he found his perfect target. It was a large two-headed lion with a mane made of flames. Good, let's see how Sunfire works against a fire affinity beast. Beasts had stronger bodies than most humans, so it'd be a good measure of his current prowess. Damien charged at the lion that had just noticed him, opting for a fully physical brawl before he began experimenting. Reaching the beast, he let out a straight punch with no added effects. The raw power contained within his muscles burst forth as it met the lion's paw. Boom! A small explosion rang out as dirt and grass flew everywhere. The exchange then continued. The lion was already nearing the limits of third class, so its intelligence was similar to a normal human. Seeing its opponent using solely physical power, its pride wouldn't allow it to fight with its elements. Fists met claws as the two continued exchanging blows, causing destruction in their wake with every step. The weird thing was, even though the lion's mane was made of fire, it didn't affect the environment in the slightest. Boom, boom, boom. Damien sent an uppercut directly into the lion's right jaw, causing its two heads to part in a V shape. He then evaded the lion's swipe before sending a full-powered punch directly into its chest. The lion flew back, unable to stabilize itself immediately. Although it didn't take much damage, the force of the punch was still present. Damien decided he'd had enough playing around. He'd already tested his physical might enough. Using the time the lion took to regain its bearings, Damien concentrated. He felt the ethereal thread that connected him to the sun. It was a thread that couldn't be severed by any means. Pouring his mana into this connection, Damien willed a flame to form on his palm, and form it did. The only difference was that this flame was the size of a fist. The lion immediately sensed the difference. Locking its eyes onto the flame on Damien's palm, it felt true fear. If that thing hit him, it was sure death. The lion immediately let out fierce flames that billowed in every direction before it turned and ran. But Damien wouldn't allow that to happen. He teleported directly in front of the lion and flicked the flame onto its body. There was no scream, no explosion, nothing. The second the flame touched the lion's body, It spread like wildfire and incinerated it. Within only a few seconds, all that was left was ash. Damien looked at the aftermath with his mouth agape. There was only a single word that came out of his mouth. Well, Chapter 75, Mountain Peak 2. The results were much greater than his expectations, but he decided to think rationally about it. There's no way he was powerful enough to kill late-stage third-class beasts with a single hit. The first explanation was that the lion already had some hidden injuries in its body that Damien had aggravated in their physical fight. The second was that the Sunfare used the lion's own flames as a base and devoured its body. And the third explanation was that it was simply due to the amount of magic power he had put into the ability this time. Each of these made sense in their own ways, so Damien assumed that it was most likely a combination of all three that led to the lion getting instantly incinerated. It was supposed to be a simple test of strength, but I ended up using most of my mana in the first fight. But Damien didn't really have anything else to test. When it came to his new dimensional magic, it was still spatial magic at its base, so it wouldn't show its prowess until he figured out how to use it properly. Ah, I can do that. Damien immediately sat down and concentrated. He had already checked the area around him and it was devoid of beasts, so he was free to do as he pleased. Damien was currently focusing on his sword art. It had been a long while since he created a new move for it, and this was largely due to the mana consumption and the fact that he was running out of ideas. He wanted to make something grander and more wide area, but he didn't know how to beat spatial collapse in this area of focus. So until he had some sort of spark of insight or idea, he'd try something else. He focused on the concept of space. How did he perceive space? What was it at its base? He didn't know the answer. His knowledge was too minuscule. But he had a faint feeling of what he thought space was. Space was a concept that was related to the birth of everything, as almost everything exists within space. Without space to contain it, even life itself couldn't thrive. He thought back to the tip he had received from the system back when he conducted his very first class change. In the beginning, there was nihility, then creation and destruction, then space and time. Space was something he saw as all-encompassing. Space was like a massive domain, and a main concept within space was distance. Distance was determined by the space between 2 points. So what if I try to ignore the concept of distance? Isn't teleportation technically doing that already? He knew it was an oversimplified explanation of how he teleported, as he had already understood the base mechanisms of this ability. But teleportation was, at its base, something that ignored distance within a certain range. He thought of how this concept would look in a sword strike. He imagined facing an opponent at range or an opponent who was fleeing. He simply slashed his sword and his enemy would fall. He could stay in place and pierce forward, and his sword would pierce his opponent's heart even if they were kilometers away. Damien got excited just thinking about it, but he calmed himself down. Isn't that just an extrapolation of Bladeless? Bladeless was used by merging his sword with the spatial layers and directly attacking the space in which something existed. A byproduct of this action was the spatial tears created in the wake of his blade and the banishment of anything that existed within that space. It was the concept that many people used to argue about on Earth to outline the negative aspects of teleportation. If you teleport into a wall, wouldn't you fuse with the wall on a molecular level? The molecules wouldn't be able to share the same points in space, causing this phenomenon. And this was a true downside to teleportation. The reason Damien never encountered this situation was simply that he always pinpointed where he wanted to teleport before he actually took action. Well, that was before he achieved third class. By this point, his vector control had reached a level where he could easily move molecules in a way where this type of situation was negligible. Besides, if he truly lost his arm this way, he could just regrow it. That small amount of pain didn't faze him anymore. What he wanted to achieve now was based on the same concept, but it was an entirely different take. Bladeless would destroy the space, resulting in any molecules existing within it being banished into the void. Meanwhile, this new attack would superimpose his sword into the points in space that his enemies were, causing the original molecules to be destroyed. This new move was much more direct. I was too focused on grand-scale things that I never thought of this sooner. Once I succeed in creating this move, I'll have to rearrange the order of my sword art. This move was fit to be the second step of his sword art, not the fourth. Luckily, the art he used was self-created and wasn't a strict and patterned art. He had always put more focus on fluidity. Because of this, it wouldn't be hard for him to change the order his attacks took. By the time Damien finished thinking about these various issues and solutions, the sun had already begun setting. Although it sounded easy when describing it, it took many hours to form a concise idea of what his next step would be. And he still didn't have an idea on how he would carry out this next step. Distance wasn't a concept he'd explored much, as he had mostly wanted pure destruction. This type of thinking was a new direction for him, but it opened up many possibilities. Distance, huh? If I start playing around with the concept of distance, can't I? Damien's eyes shone like stars when he thought of a certain move he wanted to learn before he returned to Earth. Wouldn't that be the perfect way to say hello to that bastard? Damien cooked up a grand plan for Jin, unaware that the arrogant young master had been turned into a eunuch by the girl he was recently realizing his feelings for. Standing up, Damien felt his mana capacity had been replenished enough. He had passively been gathering magic power while he was in his thoughts, so this was to be expected. Without any further delay, Damien made his way to the rendezvous point to meet with the girls. When he arrived, he saw the two chatting happily with satisfied smiles on their faces. "It seems you two also achieved some good things, didn't you?" Damien said as he walked up to them. Rose nodded. "Yeah, the new skill I got is amazing. It'll be a lot of fun showing you what I can do, though you're a blockhead who won't be able to appreciate it like I can." She was referring to his ability to see through any illusions, but she felt like wording it that way was too much of a compliment. She had to one-up Damien whenever she got the chance. Damien shook his head lightly. "All right, you can show me once we find a good opponent to fight. For now, let's reach the peak." He once again got onto Zara's back with Rose as they flew the rest of the way. Even though they expected to get attacked, the beasts were surprisingly docile. Many of them had heard the sounds of battle, and knowing how quickly those battles ended, they had no interest in throwing their lives away for nothing. As for the others, they either didn't bother fighting without reason, or they held back their hostility for another unexplained reason. Either way, the trio had a smooth ride to the peak. They figured that there would be an intense battle waiting for them when they arrived, so they were properly vigilant, but they were bound to be disappointed. There was nothing on the peak of the mountain. Rather than fight a massive fourth-class beast, all they could do was marvel at the natural beauty around them. Flowed bloomed in a seemingly orderly fashion, with each color being separated into its own area, while a beautiful lake was present in the center. The lake water was clear as if it had never been touched by human hands, and the entire meadow gave off a calming feeling. It was entrancing, giving the trio the feeling of wanting to lay down and sleep without worry. But none of them were naive enough to believe that feeling. Damien and Rose directly bit their tongues, forcing themselves to stay awake, while Zara showed open hostility and growled at the empty area. It was then that the sun finally set and moonlight descended on the world. When the light shone onto the central lake, it glowed mysteriously, shimmering in and out of existence and blinding the trio for a split second. By the time the glow receded, the lake was no more. In its place was a massive temple that let out an aura more ancient and domineering than anything any of them had ever felt. They were subject to a force that gave them the inherent urge to kneel as if it was the most natural thing to do. Although they didn't succumb to this urge, they were forced to revolve their magic power to ease the burden that was placed on their shoulders. This was caused simply by the temple's appearance, nothing more. They all looked at each other for a moment before Damien made a confident declaration. "Let's enter." Chapter 76, Temple 1. If the aura the temple exuded to the outside could be considered domineering, the inside was a chaotic mix of bloodthirsty and tranquil. Damien couldn't fathom how a human could ever balance such polar opposite emotions perfectly, let alone a construct like the temple. The first thing they saw upon entry was an expansive hall that seemed to continue for eternity. The walls of this hall were decorated with large depictions of a massive battle. As they walked forward, the depictions became even more gruesome. In the start, there was a world filled with strife. Empires would fight for territory, people would clash at even the slightest grievance, and law and order were only present within the upper class of society. They saw paintings of this society essentially leading itself on a path to ruin. However, something changed after a while. Deformed creatures darker than a starless sky suddenly appeared within the world. At first it was only one, but as time went on, they propagated and multiplied. When the creatures first arrived, the various leaders of the world simply ignored them. They figured it was a new species of beast, and promptly slayed every single one they saw. Noticing that the strength of these creatures was nothing, the leaders of the various races stopped paying attention to them. Even the members of the beast race shunned them, not claiming them as their own. But with the blatant discrimination and immense hatred that the beast race and humanoid races had against each other, these claims were widely ignored. Without anyone's notice, these deformed creatures continued spreading, kidnapping women from various races and creating progeny on the planet. They spent years in the dark, slowly waiting for their time to strike. As their progeny grew up, these creatures brainwashed them, making them faithful believers. And since the progeny had humanoid appearances, they were accepted into society without question. These children spread through the continent, preaching their beliefs and infecting the minds of countless people from all races. These people were further brainwashed and then sent to act against the nations they resided in. This was how things started. At this point, the trio had reached the halfway point of the hall. They could see a door in the distance, but they were too focused on the paintings to care. Even Zara, whose innocence was extremely prominent, still had her focus on the scenes depicted in front of her. The deformed creatures performed sacrifices and rituals, unnaturally granting strength to those that followed them as they corrupted a large part of the population. Even at this point, the higher-ups of the nations didn't take notice. They simply took the spread as a new faith that had been started. They disdained these people for praying and giving their lives to false gods. It was at this point that the deformed creatures decided it was time to act. They sent word to their homeland, depicted as a dark star within an infinite cosmos. It took 10 years for others from their race to arrive, and seeing the progress the frontrunners had made, they began to set up circular devices in various areas of the world. Then, after spending 20 years in hiding, they struck. Those circular devices widened into massive black holes, and out of those holes came swarms of the deformed creatures. It was only now that the leaders of the nations began to fight back. They were strong, stronger than anything Damien had felt before. The residual aura of these beings was strong enough to leak even when it was just a painting of them. How do you even paint such a thing? Damien only had a passing thought before he refocused on the paintings. The depiction was brutal. Denizens of the world were slaughtered like pigs. Whether they were warriors or innocents didn't matter. The deformed beings moved with the singular goal of wiping out all existence on the planet. Then, what Damien could only assume to be the fourth and fifth class beings on the planet made their move. He was surprised by the sheer number, as there seemed to be tens of demigods and thousands of fourth classes. These beings went on a rampage, killing every last one of those deformed creatures they could find. But they were too late in their efforts. They had been too conceited in their positions of power. Those who had been converted by the deformed beings made their move, crawling the streets of cities with the unnatural power they gained and committing mass slaughter, laughing while doing it. It took years to finally win the battle, but the losses were too heavy to even be considered a win. Almost half of the world's population had been raised during these short few years. For the first time since their long rule had begun, these beings realized their idiocy. They got together and proposed a truce, a method to bring their people together, and a method to unite the world. And their method found success. The denizens of the world, having experienced a massive calamity, came together in hatred for those deformed creatures. Their features were obvious even on their progeny, and anyone who possessed those features was killed on the streets regardless of their innocence. It took many years for the world to regain a semblance of peace. But those deformed creatures didn't allow it. They once again came to the world with the same purpose, but this time they brought stronger forces. On the enemy's side as well, Damien felt the residual auras of what he assumed to be demigods. Tracing the length of the wall, Damien realized that the depiction was almost over, but he felt there was too much story to tell for it to end so soon. He decided to keep observing before coming to any conclusions. As he watched, he saw another gruesome battle take place, but this time the denizens of the world were more prepared. The deformed race wasn't able to propagate as they could previously. However, this was made up for by the fact that their leaders had descended. Suddenly, the entire depiction became centered on a boy. The boy lost his family in the first calamity the world faced, but he still grew up and learned how to use his powers. He joined the war when those beings returned, and he surpassed everyone around him. As the battles raged on, he grew from a boy into a young man, and from a young man into an old one. Even at the apex of the war, the denizens of the world were losing. Placed in a compromising position, the leaders of the world decided to own up to their mistakes. They trapped the leaders of the deformed race with their schemes and directly used their mana to implode. The paintings became entirely white, depicting the massive explosion that took place. Only that single man was left alive, the one who had grown from a boy during these years of war. In front of him, countless of those deformed creatures stood, even 3 of their demigods remained. Yet he was on his last leg. Just like those before him, the man decided to sacrifice himself, but his effort was much greater than theirs. When he imploded, the space around him cracked and shattered, creating a massive black hole, while countless meteors rained down from the sky. 2 more demigods, and most of the cannon fodder died in this apocalyptic explosion. In the last panel of the hall, the man's corpse had a smile on its face, while the final living demigod on the enemy side rushed to escape. The trio was silent. None of them could bring themselves to speak. The depiction was horrific calamity on a worldwide scale, but also the tale of various heroes. It was the tale of growth and development, but also destruction and devastation. Finally, after what seemed like many hours, the silence was broken, yet not by any of the 3 currently in the room. An aged voice echoed through the halls. Finally, someone has arrived to whom I can tell my story. Chapter 77, Temple 2. Show yourself. The trio's vigilance was once again raised, but the olden voice assured them of its intentions. Fear not, children. I am but a remnant soul left in this temple, waiting patiently for someone to receive this legacy. Even with this, the 3 didn't let down their guard. Still, they gave the voice a chance to continue. The effect the depictions along the walls left on them was big enough for them to do so. The illusory form of an old man appeared out of thin air, its existence shaky and broken. When Damien looked at this old man's facial features, he immediately turned back to the painting. You are. The old man smiled. Yes, that is me at the end of that painting, or at least that was the real me. My name is Kurt Galloway, and I was once a leader of the human race. Damien was shocked. Kurt Galloway was a name he had nearly forgotten, but always stayed within the recesses of his memory. After all, if it wasn't for him, Damien would have long been dead within the dungeon. Although he couldn't be assured about the truthfulness of the old man's words, Damien did become slightly more respectful. Can you tell us why you appeared in front of us, Senior? Kurt smiled. It is quite simple, really. I just wanted to tell you a bit more about these depictions and give you a small warning about what you will face when you enter through that door. Now tell me, did you notice anything off about the paintings? Damien nodded. I noticed that the creatures in the paintings, which I assume are the Nox, are deformed grotesquely, and that form wouldn't be effective in battle. Not only that, something feels off about these events, as if they were mixed together in a way they weren't meant to be. Kurt's smile grew. Indeed, the depiction of the Nox in these paintings is subjective, but it's obvious that the artist was biased when drawing a race that wiped half of the world's population not once, but multiple times. As for your second assumption, it also tied back to what I just mentioned. The Nox's invasion on this planet didn't simply start 1,000 years ago, rather that was when it was finally ended. The very first invasion of Nox was almost 10,000 years ago. This piece of information shocked Damien and Rose to their cores. What kind of a time span was 10,000 years? They couldn't even fathom living for that long. I understand your doubt, but that is only a part of the lifespan a demigod is granted. The only ones who survived every era until 1,000 years ago were them. Those first scenes you see with the chaotic world full of strife was society 10,000 years ago. The following panels until the First War ended took 2,000 years to occur. I was born 3,000 years after that, and the war resumed 2,000 years after I was born. My parents were of noble lineage, so they easily achieved fourth class. During those 2,000 years, I gained strength normally, but when the Nox descended once more, they took everything I loved from me. Kurt's face twisted in rage. My family, my wife, even my infant child wasn't spared. After that, I ceaselessly pursued revenge, slaughtering the Nox until I managed to reach demigod level. It all culminated in that final panel you saw. Before the various demigods of the world hatched their schemes and sacrificed themselves, they put their power together to turn a small planet into a secret realm, and I used my spatial abilities to transport that realm onto the continent. The trio was once again shocked. It was no wonder that life thrived in the realm and intelligent species existed. It was once its own true world. Since we knew we were going to die, we put our legacies into this world for the later generation. And to not make the general public suspicious, we allowed those fourth classes to do the same. And then it all ended. When I sacrificed myself, I split this part of my soul to reside within the secret realm, only awakening when a new generation enters. Since I had managed to leave the Nox with only a single demigod, they retreated and haven't returned until they regained their forces. It was an elaborate plan that made them assume we still had demigods alive within the world. And like that, it's been 1,000 years. Although Kurt had summarized the events that took place, the pain in his voice was all too clear. They could feel his unwillingness, but also the relief he felt when the Nox retreated. However, Kurt wasn't done. It was only after my true body had died that I learned of this, but the Nox have been proliferating through the universe for thousands of years. Their purpose is unknown, and all they do when they dock on a new planet is driving its denizens to extinction. My only hope for the three of you that have made it to this temple successfully is that you don't allow Aparin to fall to those creatures. I'm aware that asking you to eliminate the Nox is not a task you can handle, but I hope you can at least do this small amount. Damien and Rose nodded immediately, and Zara followed after seeing their affirmation. For Damien, he owed his life to Kurt. Protecting a single world wasn't too much to ask, especially since he could escape if he was going to die. Rose was different. This world was her home, so she felt that it was only natural that she protects it. Everything she cared about was in this world. But Damien suddenly felt the need to raise a question. But why me? Kurt looked at him deeply, but he wasn't fazed by the vague question. Even if he was just a fragment of his old self, he still had enough of a connection to the secret realm to understand what Damien was asking. You see, all the legacies my true self left in the world were connected to each other, Kurt said, as a ring suddenly appeared floating in midair. With the appearance of this ring, Damien felt something in his inventory buzz. It was a similar-looking obsidian black ring. Damien had taken it from the subspace in the dungeon assuming it was a treasure, but as time passed, he had forgotten its existence. Although you are not from this world, you are someone who can be considered my successor. When it comes to spatial affinity, I always had a quirk. It was impossible for me to not pick up those young kids and teach them about the paths to developing this esoteric affinity. Besides that, why shouldn't it be you? From the way I see it, you've come from a world close to Aparin and unwillingly at that. The Nox is a threat to us all, so it's natural I warn you about it. Damien understood. In return for all the help he would receive from Kurt, he was to protect this world. It was like an exchange. Although it seemed selfish, Damien didn't mind it. It would be weirder if Kurt was completely magnanimous. Rose, on the other hand, was baffled. Another world, dungeon, he came unwillingly. She couldn't make heads or tails out of the situation. Noticing this, Damien lightly grabbed her hand. I'll explain everything once this is over. Rose nodded, as there was nothing else she could do at the moment. Suddenly, Kurt's form began to waver. It looks like my time is finally running out. Children, through that door there is a third-class member of the Nox. I had trapped him when I was still in my prime and forced him into stasis until someone arrived here. Only after you kill him will you be able to reap your rewards. I hope you are able to stay true to your promises. After giving them a few more tips, Kurt's shadow faded completely, leaving them alone in an empty hall. Before Damien could collect his thoughts, Rose grabbed his collar. You have some explaining to do, bastard. Damien smiled wryly. It seemed Rose was angry he hid his origins from her. Even Zara was curious, as she had met him within the dungeon, not knowing who he was before that. So Damien went to a corner of the hall and sat, patting the ground next to him, indicating Rose to join him. Except she didn't. It was Zara that curled up on the spot next to him. Rose stormed up to him angrily and without another word sat down directly on his lap. Putting her arms around his neck for balance, she stared into his eyes, her entire aura screaming, "Go on, explain." Damien's wry smile grew. Without wasting time, he recounted his story. From his childhood when his father disappeared to meeting Alina in high school, to the world awakening when his mother fell ill, and to the point when he was thrown into the dungeon to die. From there, he sped up the packing of his story, attempting to gloss over everything that happened in the dungeon. He succeeded for a bit, but when it got to the point where he met Zara, she intervened and told everything as it was. About running from the Wyvern, training in the subspace, Damien's fight against the Wyvern where he allowed half his body to be burnt to a crisp without flinching, and more. Zara seemed to find Damien's pain tolerance cool and heroic, so she talked about it in detail. But this made Rose realize how much Damien had downplayed the events before he met Zara. Though she wanted to know what he went through, she didn't push him. If his tolerance had reached a point where he could take grievous injuries like they were nothing, she couldn't imagine the pain he endured. Zara talked about how he was missing an arm and how he later regrew it, how they escaped to the surface, and much more. And then the story reached where they met Rose. Rose was silent, taking time to collect her thoughts. She was slightly annoyed that he had hidden such important information from her, but hearing his story, that feeling vanished. Meanwhile, Damien was getting increasingly anxious the more time it took for Rose to speak. He didn't know why, but the thought of her abandoning him due to his origins, even if it was irrational, made him extremely uncomfortable. After many minutes that felt like days to Damien, Rose looked back into his eyes. She could see the hint of anxiety he was trying to hide and couldn't help but smile. Since we first met, I've never seen him anxious, and this is what gets him there. Shaking her head slightly, Rose moved forward, once again connecting her lips with his. The difference this time was that it wasn't a kiss begging for intimacy or codependence. It was meant to assure Damien that her feelings hadn't changed. Damien could feel those emotions through her kiss. He understood what she wanted to convey, and with that, was there any other course of action? Of course not. Without even the slightest hint of hesitation, Damien kissed her back. Chapter 78, Temple 3. The two stayed still for many minutes, reveling in the taste of each other's lips before Rose decided to pull away. Rose was first to speak. When are you going back? Not long after we leave the secret realm. It's been my plan since the beginning, Damien replied. Rose stayed silent, falling into thought. It was only an entire 5 minutes later that she spoke again. "I'm coming with you." Damien was forced to do a double take. She was coming with him. Their relationship wasn't that deep yet, right? But Rose didn't allow him to possess too many questions. "That's right. I'm coming with you. I can see that you want to convince me otherwise, but you should know by now that it's impossible." Damien stared into her eyes for a bit before shaking his head wryly. "So, when we get outside, I have to explain to the Emperor that not only have I kissed his daughter twice, but I'm also going to be taking her to a different world. Aren't you just asking for my head?" Rose shrugged. "I'll tell him with you, so it'll probably be fine. Besides, he knows my love for adventure, so he will most likely be supportive." "Fine, I'll take you with me. But you have to give me a clear explanation of why you want to come after we leave this place." Rose nodded. They had already been wasting time with their drama instead of proceeding forward, and they only had around 2 months left in the secret realm. It would be foolish to continue wasting time. As the two of them stood up, Zara suddenly chimed in, "Damien, why were you guys biting each other?" Cough, Damien almost choked on air when he heard this question. Zara had no problem randomly talking about mating, but her innocence always showed when on the topic of human customs like kissing. Even though Damien knew she was the same age as him, he had trouble treating her as anything but a child. Don't worry about it. That's just something humans do when they like each other a lot," he responded, attempting to evade the question. But Zara didn't let him off easily. "So when I lick your face, we are kissing too, right?" At this point, Damien was only seconds away from rolling on the floor in awkwardness. Yes, you can technically call that kissing, but it's different. Don't worry, Zara, you won't have to know any of these things soon." Zara was still confused why Damien was looking so fidgety when he was talking, but she ignored it. Humans are interesting. With their small drama over, the trio finally made their way over to the ancient door at the end of the hall. It was obsidian black in color, matching Damien's ring, and contained countless intricate designs on its surface. Speaking of the ring, Damien had already put it on his right middle finger, next to his spatial ring that was on his index. It was the least he could do to show his respect for Kurt. Damien stopped in front of the door and turned towards the other two. "I don't know if their strength has been hyped up or anything, but the one on the other side of that door is part of a race that used to easily wipe out humans on this planet." Rose nodded solemnly as she continued his sentence. "Right, it's better to be overprepared than underprepared. Don't worry about us and open the door." Damien nodded as well and followed her wish. All it took was a slight push and the ancient door swung open, revealing the scene inside. There was a massive cavern-like room filled with artistic sculptures and designs, looking like the main hall of some royal family. The only difference was, the room was mostly empty. Only two things stood within the room. At the very back center of the hall stood a massive black obelisk that pierced towards the heavens. Even though it had most likely been over 1,000 years since its installment, it was still pristine as the day it was made. The other thing in the room stood in the very center of it all. It was a large creature, around 10 feet tall, with a humanoid body and massive wings. Its skin was darker than a starless sky, while its wings took the same color, looking slightly similar to Zara's. Its body was masculine and naked from the torso up, with what looked like torn pants from the waist down. It was packed with muscles more pronounced than even the most athletic men on Earth. And finally, its face. Its face wasn't visible at first, but when the trio properly entered the room, the entire being's figure jerked. As if waking up from a previously eternal slumber, the being slowly raised its head. Its eyelid fluttered and slowly opened. Lid, not lids. The creature did not seem to possess a nose, instead having a massive cycloptic eye that took up a great portion of its face. The first thing it saw, small humans that would be a great first meal. Its massive mouth twisted into a wide grin, which literally spanned from ear to ear, its teeth sharper than any blade. Even if it was more normal than any of the depictions from the previous hall, its head was alien enough to terrify any normal mortal. It was already in a standing position when it was put in stasis, so it stretched out its arms as if waking from a long nap. And then, it finally spoke. Its grating voice caused goosebumps to involuntarily form on Damien's arms. Good, 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 humans. I don't know who prepared this feast for me, but I shall partake in kind. Then it charged at the trio. Damien went left while Rose went right, with Zara melding into the shadows and disappearing. When the Nox finally attacked, it didn't manage to hit anyone. It wasn't disappointed, though. It had been many years since it had prey, so it was fine with playing the long game. As its eyes scanned the surroundings, its two arms snapped. The joints where its elbows should be had inverted, and its forearms and hands had sharpened. Its arms now looked like two scythes. The first one it decided to target was Damien, since he had already charged an attack. Damien grabbed his sword and got ready to parry the oncoming creature. Boom! A loud sound was produced by the clash, but the temple was too sturdy to even rumble on impact. Boom, boom, boom. Damien and the Nox kept flashing violently, both aiming for the kill, but Damien quickly found himself encountering a problem. When his blade struck the Nox's scythe-like arms, the impact was hard, as it should normally be. But whenever Damien changed his target and attempted to inflict true damage to the creature, something mysterious would happen. The area of the Nox's body that he struck would change, becoming ink-like in its texture. The inky substance would then stick to his blade and attempt to swallow it into the Nox's body. Their main power must be their bodies. Let's try fighting with elements now. Damien activated his vector field and immediately used his sword art. His body became illusory as he disappeared and reappeared in countless areas surrounding the Nox, sending massive spatial tears in its direction. The Nox let out a grating laugh. Kekekekek. And then it made another wild move. Its body was suddenly cut into multiple pieces, the unused parts splashing to the floor like water. The Nox was now riddled with holes as if it was on the verge of dying, but it was still laughing madly. Every single spatial tear Damien sent in its direction passed through it without doing damage, the areas of impact having been cut from the Nox by its own two hands. As the danger passed, the inky substance on the floor flowed back into the Nox's body, filling the holes that were previously there. The Nox watched Damien with anticipation. This scene usually made its prey feel despaired and helpless, but it was bound to be disappointed. Currently, Damien only had one thought in his head: what would happen if I devoured it? It was at this time that Rose and Zara made their move. Now that its power had been gauged, the trio decided to use their full prowess to defeat it. Any mistakes would lead to an early death, which none of them wanted. Appearing at the Nox's back without any warning, Rose grinned and raised her arm. Illusory throne. The entire room faded to black, with the only things left being Damien, Rose, and the Nox. For the first time, the Nox became wary. A massive ethereal throne manifested behind Rose, and from it, hundreds if not thousands of blades emerged, flying towards the Nox. Boom! The impact was louder than any of its clashes with Damien. Oddly enough, there were no injuries on its body, but the Nox was forced to screech in pain. It attempted to charge at Rose, only to fall into the floor. It then jumped, attempting to return to its previous elevation, but it ended up moving to the right into a small box-shaped room. Time continued to pass and the Nox was getting frustrated. Whenever it moved, it would end up in a different small room, and every direction it took was different than the one it intended. It had completely lost its bearings in the pitch-black world. The Nox once again was forced into a small room, but this one was different. Biting cold filled the room and tried to infect the Nox. Projectiles of ice randomly shot out, wanting to pierce its body. The Nox once again separated parts of itself, but this was the wrong decision. The second the inky liquid touched the ground, it was frozen at a molecular level and briskly shattered. It was the first time since the fight started that the Nox had taken damage. This cycle continued, with Rose leading the Nox randomly and forcing it into a state of confusion, and Zara slowly freezing its body, injuring it. Damien could only stand by and watch incredulously as this happened. It was the first time he was useless in a fight, but he knew he had a method to help. Using space as a medium, Damien forced the molecules in the area around him to vibrate intensely, generating a superheated plasma. Then, he gathered all of this plasma into one place, preparing a final attack. If freezing it at a molecular level could break the Nox, burning it should have a similar effect. The Nox was on its last leg. Its body had thinned considerably, and much of the substance making up its structure had been broken off. Finally, Zara was able to freeze its legs still. Now, Rose shouted. "You don't have to tell me twice," Damien responded. Like a certain overpowered guy in a world where people were named after vegetables, Damien stuck his palms forward and unleashed the massive beam of plasma he had been preparing. VOOM. Just the beam's movement was enough to cause the air to split. Nothing was allowed to exist within the same space as this plasma. Seeing the beam heading in its direction, the Nox screeched once more, but it was unable to move. Zara had thoroughly trapped its legs and was freezing them even as the beam approached. Without any suspense, the attack hit its target. And with only a final harrowing screech, the Nox disintegrated into nothing but particles. Chapter 79, Exiting 1. The blackness slowly faded as the large room came back into view. Both Zara and Rose were exhausted, but Damien was still doing fine. He hadn't been able to contribute much to this fight. "So this is the Nox, huh?" Damien said with a thoughtful look on his face. "They're really strong, not to mention their insane regeneration. If Zara wasn't quick to use her ice, that battle would have been much worse," Rose responded while patting Zara. He, Zara only giggled at the praise, not minding much about the battle itself. "Still, we don't know how much uniqueness they have. Whether the weakness we found can be exploited or not remains to be seen." Rose nodded. This one didn't seem to use mana externally at all, and the way he maneuvered his body seemed more like a trait than a skill or anything. Only then did Damien notice. The Nox they had fought did not use skills in the slightest. This was definitely weird. Even if they were a race that only used their physical body, they'd still develop skills. With the way the Nox acted, it could be assumed that their intelligence wasn't high, similar to magic beasts who grow more intelligent as they gain strength. But if the Nox was purposefully acting that way to mislead them, it painted a whole different picture. Let's not make any assumptions after only a single fight. If we aren't cautious against a massive force like this, we'd lose our lives without even understanding how," Damien said before he remembered something. "Speaking of not understanding, what was that skill you used? That was badass." Damien usually abhorred calling out attack names, as it sounded cringe to do so, but when Rose did it during the battle, he had to admit that it was cool. He silently considered whether he should start calling out some of his more concisely named skills when he used them. Rose beamed at the mention of her abilities before answering. "That's the new skill I got from my class change. What I used was only a small portion of its full power, but it's all I can do right now. Hopefully, I learn to do some even crazier things with time." Indeed, Rose's use of her illusory throne skill was rudimentary. It was a domain, a place where she was essentially a godlike being if she used it right. Although the effects wouldn't work on those stronger than her, even hundreds of second classes together shouldn't be able to touch her if she was using it. This was the reason that those who reached Grandmaster level control were valued higher than others. Domains were truly terrifying powers. Yet, the number of people that had reached this level of control, besides the various leaders, could be counted on one hand. While Zara and Rose rested and regained their mana, Damien decided to explore the room. It was weird how such a large room remained wholly empty besides the obelisk and the Nox. The walls and floor were constructed using a type of material Damien had never seen before even on Aparen. It reminded him of marble, yet its integrity was leagues above such a normal mineral. After all, it withstood the aftershocks of the entire battle without even a single scratch. Finding nothing particularly interesting about the rest of the room, Damien moved to the obelisk. It also looked normal no matter how much Damien observed it, but it gave him a mysterious feeling that he couldn't quite understand. Circling the obelisk, he found that there was writing on the side, which he proceeded to recite so the girls could hear it. For you who had slain an enemy of this world, this obelisk serves as a reward. It isn't something created by us. Rather, it was something already present at the peak of this mountain before we turned this world into a secret realm. We have no idea its purpose, nor are we sure where it came from. All we know is that it can provide immense benefits to those it deems worthy. After all, it was due to this obelisk that I was able to rise to the ranks of demigods with ease. I leave your rewards in fate's hands. If you are here, it means that I have approved of you. Thus, I do not doubt that you will succeed in obtaining something great. To receive what the obelisk wishes to give, all you need to do is place your hand on its surface. Damien looked back at the girls. Well, since you guys are still recuperating, I'll go first and test if this thing really works. He stepped forward, only slightly vigilant. After all, what could a stationary object without attack power do to hurt him? But Damien didn't realize the severity of this obelisk. Lightly touching his hand to its surface, Damien felt an irresistible force entering his body. This force did an entire round through his internal body, his void physique not being able to hinder it in the slightest. Then it simply vanished. However, it didn't go alone. The second the force left his body, Damien disappeared from the room. Zara was the first to notice. Her eyes snapped open as she felt her connection with Damien cut off. "Damien!" she yelled, but she didn't get any response. Rose wasn't doing any better. She had seen Damien suddenly vanish, but she still didn't know how it happened. With this sudden turn of events, her rational mind had long been pushed away, letting her emotions take control. Without even thinking of the consequences, Rose rushed to the obelisk and pushed her hand to its surface, attempting to reach Damien using the same method he did. And she as well felt the mysterious force. Without any suspense, Rose vanished as well. Zara tried her best to follow them, but it was futile. No matter how much she pressed on the obelisk, scratched at it, or even tried to destroy it altogether, nothing worked. Zara was thoroughly panicked. Ever since they had met in the dungeon, their mental connection had held firm. The only reason she was fine with separating from him to train was due to this mental connection. Feeling it cut off made Zara feel alone. She felt like the tragedy she suffered with her parents was happening all over again. She didn't want to lose anyone else, but she lacked the power to help. In her chaotic emotional state, Zara's bloodline surged. It was as if it was feeding on her pain. Her internal body began to wreck itself, fighting her own bloodline. Zara thrashed around. Not only was she losing Damien, she even randomly ended up in mind-numbing pain. She couldn't handle the stress anymore, and directly passed out where she stood, her body slumping to the floor. When Damien opened his eyes, he could only see pure blackness. Calling it darkness wasn't enough to justify just how empty the space around him was. Actually, as he tried to use his affinity, he couldn't even feel the existence of space around him. Not only was the concept of space absent, but he also couldn't feel his own body. It was as if his consciousness had been pulled into emptiness. It might have been seconds or it might have been years, but after a while, Damien realized that even the concept of time was missing. Damien's consciousness wandered without direction, being pulled along by waves of something he didn't understand. At some point, he even began to doubt his existence. Who am I? Where am I? It didn't take long for Damien to lose his reasoning. No matter how strong his will was, this type of situation wasn't something he could simply train himself to endure. But he didn't lose his memories. Instead, he trapped himself within them so he could maintain at least his sense of self. Time passed like this. Was it only a millisecond or did thousands of years pass? Damien didn't know. As he was carried by the current, something besides emptiness entered his vision. Damien was enthralled. Any change in his current environment was something he would welcome. He didn't care about danger, or rather the concept of danger wasn't something he understood anymore. He didn't know what he was doing or how he was doing it, but Damien slowly made his way over to that source of light. What he saw was something he'd never forget no matter how long he lived. A massive river, larger than planets and larger than galaxies. This river spanned for eternity in both directions. If one attempted to find the ends of this river, they'd most likely forfeit their egos in the process. The river was pristine blue, not in the color of water but in the color of stars. It was entirely made up of light, or was it energy? Damien had no idea. He just stared at this river unblinkingly, entranced by its flow. Damien Void, I am Damien Void. Something about the river helped him regain his sanity. It calmed his chaotic state and brought him to something similar to enlightenment. As if this was the cue it had been waiting for, the river swirled. Scenes began to play on its ethereal surface. A man stood in front of an army. Countless hundreds of thousands of existences stood in front of him, attempting to halt his movement. The man stared at them calmly from his spot within the air. He gazed down upon them like they were ants. Lightly raising his hand, the man said a single word. Collapse. All hell broke loose. The majority of the army was wiped out in that single move, with the residual shockwaves decimating the rest. In the next scene, the man no longer needed to move. Enemies still barred his path, though less in number. Their strength was unfathomable. But the man simply looked at them. Die. That was all it took. An entire planet was raised with a single word from his mouth. The man then looked in a certain direction before smiling lightly. The people around the man were confused by his sudden behavior, but they had stood by his side for many years. Damien couldn't see their faces, but he could feel their emotions. They didn't doubt the man in the slightest. Although those around the man didn't know what he was looking at, Damien did. After all, the man was staring straight at Damien. He didn't know how he knew this, but he understood that it was true. This was a feeling that stemmed from the core of his being. The man's mouth moved, and Damien swore he could hear his voice. The space-time river, sure brings back memories. That was the last thing Damien saw before everything started fading. He knew his time at the river was over, but he desperately wanted to stay. However, he no longer had control of his movement. As Damien was forced out of the emptiness, an inconspicuous part of the river detached from the rest, shooting into Damien's consciousness. The amount was smaller than even an atom, so Damien didn't even realize what happened. Even as he tried his hardest to return to the river, Damien's vision once again faded to black. Chapter 80, Exiting 2. When Rose opened her eyes, she found herself in a space filled with the color white. Nothing else was present in her surroundings. However, she didn't pay any attention to this. She had only one purpose at the moment, which was to find Damien. "Damien," she yelled, attempting to get a reaction. But it was all for naught. After all, Damien wasn't even in the same space as her. Left with no other options, Rose attempted to move through the space and search. It was only then that she realized she had no conscious control over her movements. Her body was stuck in place, seemingly being forced there by some force she couldn't understand. All of a sudden, the white expanse began to unfurl like a box. First came the space above her, then the three sides. The appearance of the box itself confused Rose, since the same seemed that it expanded as far as her eye could see. Yet, only a few kilometers away from her, there were walls. With the disappearance of these walls, Rose was subject to the scenery outside. The sky was colored in rainbows. She couldn't find any other way to describe it, since most of the colors that constituted the sky couldn't be placed on the existing color spectrum. The walls of the box slowly deformed and merged with the sky, becoming clouds that floated aimlessly. The scene was enough to entrance her, causing her to forget her original purpose. She was stuck trying to comprehend the scenes around her. It was then that the floor finally began to move. Subconsciously, Rose attempted to use her mana to fly, but found she was unable to do so. The fear of falling into the unknown gnawed at the back of her mind, but wasn't able to completely snap her out of her trance. It did, however, make her look down at the floor that was folding in on itself like a piece of paper being folded over and over. Unlike paper, though, the The floor continued to fold infinitely, becoming a speck of dust that floated with the wind and joined the clouds. For some reason, Rose's entire perception was focused on this speck, rather than paying attention to what was below her. This entire time, she was unable to formulate a coherent thought. Her mind was jumbled, but the scenes of the walls becoming clouds, of the infinite expanse becoming a box, of the floor becoming a speck of dust, and of the incomprehensible skis resulted in an influx of insights entering her mind. In her current state, this only served to further confuse her. Finally, Rose ended up looking below her. Boom! It was as if an explosion went off in her mind. The chaotic thoughts cleared themselves as she gazed upon a mystical scene. There was no ground, as the area below her descended into a harrowing abyss, but she didn't focus on that. Rather, her focus was on the massive golden rivers that danced through the void. These swirling golden rivers all connected in the middle and formed an expansive sea that flowed to eternity. Waterfalls made of this gold were present everywhere, dyeing the atmosphere in their color. Rose's eyes throbbed intensely. She could see a river flowing behind her, connecting to her eyes like a karmic thread, yet it wasn't that. She truly didn't understand what was happening. Her eyes continued to throb. Gazing into the sea of gold, various scenes flashed before Rose's eyes. A mother birthing a child, only for it to be stillborn. A homeless man begging on the street, being ignored by the many pedestrians that passed, and many more. Everything seemed random to her. She tried her best to find a connection or even a similarity between the scenes entering her mind, but she couldn't. At least, at first she couldn't. Slowly but surely, Rose began to piece the images together. The mother of that child framing an innocent man in a bid to steal his money and resorting to drugs to cope with her emotions. That homeless man betraying and killing a good friend to satisfy his vices and running away from his sins. Rose began to see scenes of people doing good and bad, committing actions that fell within a gray area, and many more. However, they all sowed karma. Each action of these people resulted in a reaction further in their lives. She felt that if she wanted to, she could change a single action these people took and cause a butterfly effect that changed the course of their entire lives. The throbbing in her eyes grew to its peak, forcing her to shut them. The golden glow they shone with infused into their very being, forcing an evolution onto her. Her ruby eyes began to morph. Although they stayed mostly the same color, her trait imposed onto them, becoming her true eyes. Before, she could switch between the two as she pleased, but it looked like that was no longer an option. Before she even understood what had just taken place, Rose felt a mysterious force rejecting her from the dimension she was currently in. As she tried to take in every single detail of the realm one last time, Rose's vision faded to black. The final month of the secret realm was almost over, with only a single day left until the participants returned to the continent. Knowing this, everyone was doing their best to maximize their gains. Within that eerie forest, the dark horse of the tournament was riding a skeletal horse, looking at a new legion of undead he had built with a satisfied smile on his face. In another region, Ethan stood proudly among a group of 8-foot-tall men whose bodies were covered in scars and tattoos. Under his foot was one of their kin, but none of the men seemed to mind. Instead, they roared with laughter and excitement as they celebrated the warrior in front of them. Meanwhile, on Godspark Mountain, Zara was rampaging through the peak layer. She had woken up half a month after she fell into the coma, but she was still drowning in sorrow. However, every fiber of her being refused to accept that something bad happened to Damien. There hadn't been a single time since they met that he met with a problem he didn't solve with confidence. Betting on this assumption, Zara prioritized strength. Her thoughts were still largely innocent, but there was a certain part of her that was forced into reality. I will never allow this type of thing to happen again. This was the thought in her head. When her parents died, she was powerless, and now when something mysterious happened to Damien, she was powerless. She didn't care how long it took or what means she used to accomplish it. All she desired was strength. and her bloodline reveled in this emotion. It fueled her determination even further and allowed her to return to her most basic bestial instinct, to kill, to eat, and to evolve. So this was what Zara had been doing. She was gaining strength in the most primitive way possible in hopes that she would never be useless again. And after an entire month of waiting, Zara's expectations paid off. In the middle of her hunt, she had sensed her mental connection with Damien return as if nothing had happened. Although he seemed to be disoriented, she could tell that he was completely fine. Disregarding everything else, Zara charged directly up the mountain to reunite with him again. When Damien woke up, he had no idea where he was. His mind was a mess of jumbled memories. Slowly, he regained his bearings, only to distance himself from the monolith as fast as he could. He couldn't remember much of what happened, but the scenes he did remember terrified him. He recalled floating through emptiness for what felt like years. He remembered the struggle he had retaining his ego, but everything else was a blur. He had faint memories of the majestic river he saw. After all, how could he forget such a sight? Even with his hazy recollection, he still marveled at the scene. The final thing he remembered was just a flash, but he couldn't shake the feeling that it was extremely important. It was the figure of a man. Although he couldn't make out the man's features, he heard the words he said. Space-time river. Next to Damien, Rose was going through a similar situation. She remembered the incomprehensible scenery that surrounded her, and she remembered the seas of gold, but the visions she saw within that sea were hazy and mostly eluded her. When the two of them noticed each other, they immediately embraced. Rose clung to Damien as if he would die tomorrow, while Damien wasn't doing any better. Their experiences differed dramatically but were equally impactful to them. They sought comfort in each other's arms. At this time, a huge black shadow arrived above them and tackled them to the ground. Zara almost strangled Damien with how tight she pinned him down while she continuously licked his face. If one looked closely, one could see the tears that stained her fur. The three of them stayed within the temple for the next few days, enjoying the fact that they were reunited. After all the twists and turns they'd encountered since arriving, they were in dire need of rest. In this time, neither Damien nor Rose had checked their statuses to review any changes from their experiences, as they had made a prior agreement. What happened to them may have been confusing and slightly traumatic, but they both received an immense influx of insights and comprehension when they returned to the temple. They knew there'd be immense benefits waiting for them to explore. And since they decided to rest, checking their status would only be detrimental. Seeing the changes or revisions there would fuel their desire to train. And like that, the final days within the secret realm passed swiftly. The trio stood before the ancient temple that had provided them more benefits than anything else with complicated emotions. It was a mixture of gratitude and grudge, but in the end, they still bowed to show respect. The tokens they were given before their entrance began vibrating as the light of spatial fluctuations covered them, leading them back to the continent from which they came.